Introduction. If you have purchased this book, this means that right now you have been plagued with all the possibilities that you may encounter with various situations. You wish to find a solution to your current predicament of chronically overthinking a particular situation. Why? This is because your brain has chosen to fixate itself on the various potential outcomes it could have had if it had caused you to act differently in a particular outcome. This book is specifically written to help you overcome your fixation on the what-ifs that you face on a daily basis, and help you ground yourself into the present period with exercises and practices designed to help you center your train of thought. To use several pop culture references, our brains in a particular situation tend to think in terms of multiversal what-ifs to the point that your thought processes are summarily everything, everywhere, all at once. However, it is physically impossible to stop your brain from what it perceives. As you go through this book, it must be impressed upon you as the reader to know that this book serves to guide you through various processes and techniques that enable you to stop overthinking. This book cannot stop you from the process of thought, which in itself is a natural function of the brain. What this book is designed to do is to help you center and marshal your thoughts into a semblance of order that reduces the amount of stimulation that your brain receives and enables it to think clearly and orderly. Once your brain thinks clearly and orderly, you are able to come up with logical reasons that help you stay grounded and focused in the present, and forget about the what-ifs in every situation that you may encounter. The book is not meant to be a process, as each person has a different method that appeals to them, to enable them to stop the process of overthinking. What connects these methods is that they have been proven their ability to help center a person and create a proper thought process that allows logic to determine their thoughts and not all the myriad possibilities that cause a person to think on other topics. As you read this book, it is important to determine why you want to stop overthinking. Despite the apparent benignity of the word, overthinking does contribute a significant amount of lost productivity on your person. You may have been told by a family member to stop overthinking it. Your superior at work may have told you to stop overthinking it, and this is just the start. You may find yourself in an endless tunnel of thought, and as you go deeper and deeper into your thought processes, you unconsciously find that your work productivity suffers, and your home life also takes a nosedive. This in turn triggers another series of unhealthy cycles that can cost you a lot more than a simple therapy session, humor aside. Hence, it is imperative that as you read this book, you are able to have a thorough comprehension of who you are as a person. It is only when you realize who you are as a person that you are able to identify what makes you choose to think too much, and identify the potential triggers that cause you to think so. This way you are able to choose the best method that works for you and enable you to break the cycle of what-ifs, and allow you to focus on the here and now. Once you have done so, then you can truly begin to turn the pages of this book, and begin your journey to wrest your thoughts into order. You can truly begin to stop the endless thought processes that plague your mind. 1. When thinking becomes overthinking. There is a fine balance between what constitutes thinking, and when does it become overthinking. Truthfully, because the idea of thought itself is an abstract concept, there is no identifiable threshold by which the usual process of thinking eventually becomes overthinking. There is a limit, however, and that is heavily dependent upon how aware you are as a person of your personal perceptions. Each person has a certain level at which their usual thought processes become pathological in their amount, and hence, the approach that is utilized in this book needs to be tailored to your unique psychological makeup. For instance, a student would have a different set of worries compared to, say, a rocket scientist who frets about every single detail prior to the launch of a rocket. A child obviously has a different threshold as to what constitutes overthinking compared to an adult due to differences in their ability to perceive and comprehend, and their overall exposure to various stimuli. Too much homework and negative feedback, for instance, may cause the child to overthink, as this is their usual stimulus in school, whereas in an adult, it could be due to an awkward encounter, or the occurrence of a situation that could have been preventable. The approach in this chapter, then, as stated in the introduction to this book, requires a high degree of self-awareness. As the best person to define what constitutes overthinking is yourself. When does a healthy level of thought become pathological in its amount? When does a critique become a trigger to an unhealthy response that causes you to lurk in the depths of your mind? You may wonder, why is the word pathological and unhealthy used in this instance? Because overthinking can negatively impact your life, as mentioned in the introduction of this book. As a refresher, it could affect your job, your family, and your life, and lead to an unhealthy cycle of what-ifs. Hence, it is imperative that you are able to be aware of your own mind. When do you consider thoughts normal? It is only when you have become aware of your limitations that you would be able to adequately define overthinking on a personal level. If you are unsure as to your limits, then we first identify what your triggers are, and to know when these triggers may occur, we must first define what overthinking really is. Overthinking, if you went with the standard dictionary definition, is simply defined as a period where you think too much. Simple, yet it does not encompass the entire gamut of emotions and thoughts that one actually feels when this occurs. If you opt for the more precise, psychological definition, which is an excessive fixation on a particular topic or situation for an extended period of time. We hit the nail on the head with the first three words, an excessive fixation. Here is where you need the importance of self-awareness, as you are the best person to identify if you are fixated on a particular topic or situation. Now here is the difference. At some point, overthinking is healthy as it helps come up with various solutions. Once the solution has been arrived upon, your thought processes immediately revert to their pre-stress state. Unhealthy overthinking, on the other hand, occurs if you continue to fixate on the topic or situation despite its conclusion, and you continue to dwell upon all the possibilities that may or may not occur. While there is no specific time period, you can determine if it is excessive if you find yourself thinking "what if" more frequently than is usual. At this point, if this thought process begins to overwhelm you and creates a negative impact on your life, then you know that this is excessive. If you feel that this process is unhealthy, it is excessive. It all depends now on your perception and your perceived limits. Simply, if you begin to feel overwhelmed with all the details and thoughts on what could have been, it is unhealthy. 1.1 How does it start? The most common trigger to all this is a word, and in essence it all boils down into how it is said and how we interpret it. We have heard of miscommunications, and it happens all the time. The most crucial point at this chapter is reliant on how our brain interprets the communications it receives from other people. Terseness in speech and brevity may indicate that the person has no time to talk, and while this may be common in high-intensity events, there is the potential for the brain to interpret it as irritation, and hence you may feel that you are a nuisance when you really are not. This is not to say, however, that it is all merely in your head, no. There are a variety of factors to consider, however. The weightiest one relies on our ability to interpret communications and read between the lines, which becomes one of the central topics that is to be discussed as we go along in this book. The triggers are dependent from person to person, hence, if you have no idea what triggers you, it would be ideal to cozy up to a trusted friend or family member to help you walk through this, to help identify potential triggers. 1.2 How will you know if overthinking begins to exert a negative influence in your life? This is a crucial question as you read this chapter, as you would have to know the difference between the way your body reacts to common stressor, and the way your body reacts to when your mental processes begin to get overwhelmed by the sheer number of thoughts that your mind begins to ponder upon. Negative impacts wrought by overthinking can include the following. Insomnia, simply this is your inability to sleep. There are distinctions, however, as the general role of sleep is to promote your body to rest. While it is advisable that one obtain at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per day, it is possible to be well rested even if you obtain less hours of sleep than what is originally recommended. The main focus in this one is quality of sleep over quantity of sleep, and as long as your body feels rested, your sleep schedule would be alright. The crucial factor in the determination of the amount of sleep is the fact that your body was able to obtain the rest that it needed. That might not be the case with insomnia. In proper sleep, your brain is able to enter what is called a REM cycle, wherein your brain enters a state of rest, which allows you to enter a dream state. In insomnia, your brain is unable to enter a state of rest, as it continues to be in a state of activity as it processes various scenarios within its neural network. Hence, your brain is unable to fully rest, and neither is your body. Your eyes may be closed in this instance, but your body is on full alert and is unable to obtain the rest it needs to recharge. What happens next is that your body lacks the rest that it needs, and subsequently causes you to either be lethargic or narcoleptic, wherein you crave sleep in hours that should be ordinarily devoted to work or time with your family. Because of this lack of energy, your work-life balance and your family life suffers, and herein lies the first negative impact brought about by overthinking. Anxiety. There are certain levels of anxiety that are psychologically defined, and what is considered as a healthful state of anxiety is only in the mild level. For anxiety to be debilitative in nature, that involves a present state of anxiety from moderate to severe levels, wherein your mind becomes fixated on imaginary scenarios that are yet to occur, and you begin to develop plans to tackle these should they happen. Anxiety itself becomes the vehicle by which a person begins to use other coping mechanisms, such as the use of alcohol and medications, in order to achieve some semblance of tranquility. It must be impressed upon the reader that though useful, these are merely crutches that are supportive in nature, and only provide a temporary relief. Hence, it would be more beneficial to the state of mind of a person that to address anxiety adequately requires the need to tackle the topic of fixation head-on. How does anxiety negatively impact a person who overthinks? Aside from the development of alcohol and medication dependencies, anxiety on particular topics causes you to enter into a downward spiral, and your subconscious desire to retain control over your thoughts. If you feel that you encounter this, then you have entered into an unhealthy state of anxiety. Perfectionism. This circles back to the previous concerns brought about by anxiety. When we fear what is unfamiliar or unknown to us, we have the tendency to be anxious about an unknown quantity or entity, hence we feel the subconscious need to be in control of the situation. Because of our need to be on top of this situation, we find ourselves in the need to be absolutely perfect. However, this is not the only scenario wherein perfectionism applies, as this can also apply to individuals who find themselves in a highly pressurized environment, wherein there is a lot expected from them. The greatest factor that drives a perfectionist is the fact that they might fail, and as a result, the perfectionist would perform and engage in any behavior that may potentially prevent failure. This includes overthinking, and the continuous engagement of thought processes to ensure that failure does not become an option for them. Perfectionists are not what you would classify as risk-takers, as they are the type of person who would require a guaranteed outcome before they make a decision, and as such, if you find that you are unwilling to take on a new task, or engage in a new activity because you frequently worry about if whether or not you will do well in it, then you are negatively impacted by perfectionism as it relates to overthinking. Headaches. The first three signs mentioned are deeply rooted in the psychology of a person. However, headaches, as a more obvious manifestation of bodily distress, becomes an observable sign that our mental processes begin to take a toll upon the body through the initiation and stimulation of pain receptors. While headaches can be attributed to a variety of etiological reasons such as a pathologic response in the body, they may also develop if the brain finds itself excessively stimulated by too much information that causes it to go into elaborate thought processes, again, overthinking. This is because the brain is used to patterns of rest. In examinations, for instance, the brain does enter periods of rest to allow memories to be triggered. If the brain is not permitted to rest, it begins to exhaust itself, and hence it triggers the pain receptors that tell your body that it needs to rest. If you do have a headache, it would be advisable to simply let your mind rest. There are techniques to help you get a handle on this to ensure that your mind enters a state of restfulness, and this will be discussed as we go through the book. It is best to even consume food, as your brain will need the energy to recover. Medication should only be used as a last resort, only if rest and consumption of food do not alleviate the pain. If you do intend to use medication, only do so with the advice of a healthcare professional. Muscle and joint pain. If one recalls the basics of biology, the muscles and bones are innervated and are subsequently connected by a network of nerves to the brain. Subsequently, because the brain controls the functions of the body, and if it continues to do so at an unusual pace, then this lack of restraint will eventually reflect onto the muscles and joints in the form of pain. If one goes back to the previous concept, headaches, and takes into consideration the presence of muscle and joint pain, then it can be surmised that pain is a concept that signals when your body is negatively impacted by the occurrence of overthinking. Hence, this is one of the signs that should be established if you intend to identify whether or not you have reached the threshold where thought processes become overthinking. Pain is considered by some to be the sixth vital sign, and when taken into this context, it is rightfully so, as it helps your body signal you that it is in some form of distress and that you need to attend to it that it may be alleviated. Muscle and joint pains are physical manifestations, and that is what makes this a matter of concern, as your safety may be jeopardized. If you feel that your pain is of such a nature that your physical health is debilitated, then overthinking has developed a severely negative impact upon your person. Fatigue. The idea of fatigue is often associated with tiredness, and for good reason. There are few words that can describe the sensation of extreme tiredness better than fatigue. Fatigue is often accompanied by anxiety, a symptom which has been tackled earlier in this chapter. Fatigue itself also serves to amplify the presence of pain. What this means is that what should be a milder pain in any part of the body becomes more painful if it is accompanied by fatigue. Fatigue is an emotionally dangerous concept as it reduces the ability of the body to cope with the stressor that it has encountered. If it is accompanied by anxiety, there is a heightened chance for sleep disorders such as insomnia. Because of the presence of sleep disorders, there is also an increased chance for muscle tension, hence muscle and joint pain, whose effects are in turn amplified by the fatigue. It is a cycle that overthinking may create, and it will exert a significant impact upon your life if left uncontrolled. There is a remedy to break this cycle, and it is spaced throughout this book as it is important that you establish control over your body's responses. Control in this instance does not refer to the control that a perfectionist seeks, but rather control in how your body and your mind respond to a particular stressor. If you are able to keep your cool, then you will be able to overcome overthinking and be better for it. We have touched upon the physical manifestations of overthinking, however, there are mental ones that must be touched upon. Overanalysis, in line with the idea of overthinking, is overanalysis. One could say that these two may be interchanged with the other, as both involve the application of excessive thought processes that adversely affect the mental capacity of a person. This stems from the perfectionism discussed before, wherein it is essential in a person to maintain control over a particular situation. However, the maintenance of control does not necessarily translate into an ideal situation, as you may end up with more stressor than you originally had. There are also situations that you are unable to control, such as those committed by a third party or those that are considered as force majeure. Subsequently, it is of import that you, as the reader, would be able to accept limitations. Limitations in that you are able to accept that not everything can be fully controlled by you, and that you have to let go of certain situations. When you let go of a worry, it can really liberate you from a lot of worry and break the cycle of overthinking. When there is a snafu in any situation that you may encounter, there has to be a little flexibility on your end, and the ability to adapt to changes. To use the trite phrase, change is constant. You may have planned for an event, for instance, but it does not necessarily mean that you are able to stick to the plan permanently. Even the most detail-oriented person may have their plans altered every now and then. It is essential that you are able to bring yourself to accept the occurrence of changes in any situation, and to encounter them not as a hindrance, but as a challenge that can be surmounted in simple steps. Do not force yourself to come up with imaginary scenarios. The point of this is to stop overthinking after all. Instead, roll with the changes and adapt. Ask for help if you must. Self-doubt of a person. It is often said that the worst enemy of a person is themselves. Why is that? Where other people may view us as paragons of virtue, we tend to appraise ourselves with an extremely critical perspective. As a result, because we tend to compare ourselves against a particular standard, we often find that we fall short of what constitutes our perceived ideal. Due to our deep-seated nature to compare, we often doubt our capabilities and as a result doubt every rational decision we made. We now enter the what-ifs that we seek to contradict in this very book. There is the need now to accept situations for what they are, in that they cannot change regardless of the amount of plans that we are able to come up with, and that we cannot be omniscient and anticipate every single circumstance that may occur in our plans. It is a matter of mastery over our fear of the unknown that would help us overcome our fear of self-doubt and prevent the occurrence of second guesses for every decision that we make. Mental absence. We are familiar with cliched expressions such as physically present, mentally absent, or the lights are on but no one is home. While humorous in their expression, they are significant in that the person whom these expressions are aimed at have literally blanked out. One of the more plausible reasons as to why this occurs is because the person has entered a dissociated state, wherein they mentally check out because their minds require a certain amount of time to process certain thoughts as they occur. This is one of the mental signs of overthinking. This is not limited, however, to the blank episodes experienced. Other instances that fall within this set of symptoms include continuous worry about an idea while you spend time with your family, or are at work. The crucial point in this is that you are unable to derive enjoyment from activities because your mind is focused on another idea. You find yourself unable to spend time with your friends and family due to, say, a conference that you have to make a presentation on, and you fret over imaginary faults and scenarios. The best way to overcome this as it occurs is to take it slowly. If you find yourself in a predicament, it is necessary first to break it down into smaller processes that you can easily accomplish. If it makes you feel better, make it into a checklist and then accomplish each step. This way, you are able to avoid what-ifs and worries about whether or not you have been able to accomplish a certain step. 1.3 The effect. Collectively, all of the mental and physical symptoms of overthinking can create a negative impact upon your physical health. Psychiatry would correlate the presence of anxiety and sleep disorders with overthinking, where one behavior becomes the direct cause of another. Summarily, if one is anxious, they are unable to sleep properly. Sleep disorders are categorized into 5 subsets: insomnia, hypersomnia, excessive sleep, sleep-related breathing disorders, circadian rhythm disorders, and parasomnias. What we will touch upon in this topic is insomnia, which has been touched upon earlier in this chapter and which will be expanded upon here. Insomnia, in its clinical definition, consists of the dissatisfaction with the amount of sleep one has had, or dissatisfaction with the quality of sleep that had occurred. An insomniac is a person who has difficulties in attempts to sleep, difficulties to maintain a sleepy state, or the person tends to wake up earlier and is unable to return to sleep. There are several types of insomnia that result. Insufficient sleep hygiene. When in reference to sleep hygiene, these are practices wherein the person engages in prior to sleep. In this instance, the person did not engage in behavior that induces their body to enter sleepiness. Some of these behaviors include the consumption of caffeine and nicotine, hence you should not smoke or drink coffee or soda, excessive emotional and physical stimulation, such as overthinking and frequent naps. To apply it into this context, overthinking falls under insufficient and inadequate sleep hygiene, hence one should avoid work-related calls if they tend to cause one to overthink, and establish firm limits as to when you should deal with work-related concerns. Psychophysiological insomnia is defined as conditioned arousal when one tends to attempt to sleep. This results from the presence of stress and anxiety and often results from consistent rumination, hence overthinking. Because of the psychological effects, as we have discussed earlier on in this chapter, the body may experience headaches, muscle and joint pains, which may cause the body to experience difficulties as it tries to enter a restive state. Paradoxical insomnia is when the body perceives that it is in a state of restfulness when it is not. The most common cause of this type of insomnia is overthinking, and it is remedied simply through the elimination of overthinking. Idiopathic insomnia is insomnia that has no identifiable cause. It cannot be determined if there is a correlation with overthinking, however, it is the lifelong inability to attain sleepiness. Insomnia due to substance use, while unrelated to the topic in this book, it is still a type of insomnia that results from substance and medication use. This may include the use of stimulants that you may take if you attempt to induce a state of wakefulness to help your thought processes. It is remedied through the elimination of the substance that induces stimulation. The most common factor among these types of insomnia, as you may have gleaned, is overthinking, as this triggers a response within your brain that causes it to generate various responses as the body attempts to come up with solutions to what the brain has identified as a concern that should be addressed. When one compares this to the incidence of anxiety disorders, this would be categorized now under moderate to severe anxiety, wherein the person with this level of anxiety would experience difficulties on how to logically process information to the point that their cognitive functions are drastically affected. The various symptoms that we touched upon in this chapter tend to manifest themselves when a person has entered a state of severe anxiety, that the body begins to be negatively impacted. This is when you should take a break, as once your body begins to manifest symptoms, it has entered a state of constant severe anxiety which is absolutely unhealthy. Continuous maintenance of this level of anxiety results in potential exhaustion, which could cause your body to overwork itself and eventually cause death. This is because your body is unable to obtain the rest that it needs to recharge. 1.4 Conclusion. While you are not on death's door, it is important that throughout this book, you are able to understand yourself and your personal limitations to make the most of the treatment strategies in this book. Hence, before you continue, it must be reiterated that you are able to know yourself more, and are able to accept your limitations, that you may be able to progress to the next chapters in this book. When you are fully able to accept that your mind and your being are flawed, and that they are expected to be imperfect, you would begin to understand how the exercises in this book are able to work best with a mind that finds itself more malleable to acceptance and more tolerable of its mistakes. 2. The brain and overthinking. Before we delve into the structure of the brain, it is essential that we are able to understand first how our nervous system actually works. This entails a glance into the most basic unit of the nervous system, the neuron. If you would recall biology and anatomy classes, the nervous system itself is divided into two main divisions: the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which consists of the various nerve fibers that are spread throughout the body and are entirely responsible for the innervation of the body, that we may be able to move, and the organs are able to perform their expected functions. Because we deal with the process of thought now, of greater importance in this chapter would be the central nervous system, and from there, we would be able to discuss first the involvement of the brains and the central nervous system. Thought processes and subsequent nerve functions involve the transmission of signals through the neurons, and to understand how the transmission of thoughts work, it is important first to understand the neuron. 2.1 The neuron. Neurons or nerve cells are the basic unit of the nervous system and in themselves have two types of categorizations. Despite this, the neurons share the same structure that facilitates the transmission of signals from the brain throughout the rest of the body. A neuron consists of a cell nucleus, an axon which is an elongated part that extends from the nucleus and cell body, the dendrites which resemble branches that surround the cell body, and the Schwann cells, which are specialized cells that help speed up the transmission process. We touch upon their individual functions. The cell body of the neuron is the part of the neuron that contains the nucleus of the cell, which helps maintain the functions and life of the cell. Nerve cell bodies tend to gravitate closer to the brain and are often protected by bones. There are little to no cell bodies in the arms and legs, as these parts are more susceptible to injury. Dendrites are structures that extend from the cell body and resemble tiny branches. They are responsible for the reception of nerve impulses that are transmitted from other neurons before it relays the impulse towards the axon, which transmits the nerve impulse away from the cell body. The axon is an elongated structure at one end of the cell body that terminates in a gap between neurons. Electrical nerve impulses are transmitted through the cell membranes between the dendrites, cell body and the axons. The Schwann cells are specialized cells that are wrapped around the axons and dendrites of the peripheral nervous system. Oligodendrocytes perform the same function in the central nervous system, and encloses them in a myelin sheath. This myelin sheath insulates the neurons from the impulses, as without it the cells would short-circuit. There are gaps between each part of the sheath, and these are called the nodes of Ranvier, which play a key role in the transmission of impulses. The nerve cells do not touch each other, however, despite how densely packed they are. This is because at the end of each axon is a gap called the synapse. The axons terminate at a point called the synaptic axon, wherein there are knob-like appendages that contain specialized chemicals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters then convert the electrical signals into chemical signals, which then get transmitted over the synapse into the dendrites of another neuron, before it gets converted once more into an electrical impulse. There are chemical inactivators at the cell body that deactivate the neurotransmitter to prevent the continuous inflow of impulses. Neurotransmitters are an essential part of the discussion in this chapter, as they are responsible for the transmission of signals throughout the body via the nervous system and form an integral part of the medications used in the treatment of various psychiatric conditions. 2.2 Nerves. Neurons collect into a group referred to as nerve bundles. These nerves are categorized into sensory nerves, which are the nerves that stem from our sense organs. Motor nerves are responsible for the movement of various body parts. Mixed nerve and nerves share both sensory and motor nerve characteristics and are mostly located in the peripheral nervous system. A group of nerves that are bundled together are referred to as a nerve tract and are located within the central nervous system. They are referred to as the white matter of the nervous system due to the color of the myelin sheaths that surround them. We have mentioned the role of the transmission of impulses and their role in how overthinking affects the body. The transmission of impulses results from the polarization and depolarization of nerve cells. When a nerve does not carry any impulse, it is in a state of polarization. Depolarization takes place when a neurotransmitter causes the nerve to accept an impulse, and once this impulse has been transmitted, the cell becomes repolarized. The process is an elaborate one, however. In the interests of its context to overthinking, it would be comparable to a constant state of activity in your body that causes it to respond in accordance with the number of stimuli that are present in the environment. This type of process takes place innumerable times in the body, and that is at a normal rate of thought. Once you begin to overthink, consider it a method by which the body begins to overload itself, and you eventually succumb to exhaustion, simply because your body and your mind are overloaded. 2.3 The brain. The brain is a complex structure that is comprised of a network of nerves that function as a whole organ. The brain is comprised of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata, the pons, the midbrain, the hypothalamus, and the thalamus. While the brain is composed of different parts as well as other subparts, they are able to interact to enable the composition of thought and the ability to analyze and react to a particular situation. While it would be essential to discuss all the parts of the brain, we would limit the discussion in this chapter to include the parts of the brain that are responsible for the thought processes, so we will not discuss every single part of the brain in the interests of proper context. The medulla oblongata, while not directly related to the thought process, deserves a space for discussion due to its integral role in the regulation of the vital signs of the body. These are the same vital signs that alert you to the fact that your body is in some state of distress that requires attention. The hypothalamus is a key component of the brain as it is responsible for various functions such as the secretion of hormones, the ability of the body to thermoregulate, the control of our appetite, the regulation of the functions of the organs of the body, the stimulation of visceral responses in the presence of emotional situations, such as our responses to anxiety and other stressor, and the regulation of our body rhythms, such as those that involve our ability to sleep. From this, it can be gleaned that when our body responds to overthinking, our hypothalamus is involved due to its integral role in the way our body responds to particular stimuli. The thalamus is primarily concerned with sensation, as it is responsible for the transmission of impulses from the sensory nerves and organs to the brain for analysis. The thalamus is also able to promote the rapid interpretation of impulses, to elicit rapid reactions from the brain. The thalamus plays a role in the prevention of overthinking, as it is able to suppress sensations that it believes are unpleasant to the brain. The thalamus is able to close off sensations that it perceives as unimportant, and allow the brain to concentrate on the task at hand. When this is applied to overthinking, the thalamus then has the ability to allow the brain to filter out unimportant details, and allows you to focus on what needs to be done. Throughout this book, there will be methods which will enable you to properly utilize this ability of the thalamus to filter out information, and allow you to properly concentrate to avoid the occurrence of overthinking. The cerebrum is the most important part of the brain and is the largest part. It is composed of two hemispheres that are connected by a band of 200 million neurons, referred to as the corpus callosum. The outermost portion of the cerebrum consists of the cerebral cortex. This is colored gray as it consists mostly of the cell bodies of the neurons that enable the cerebrum to function. Underneath the gray matter is the white matter of the brain, which consists of the sheathed axons that make up the remainder of the neurons in the cerebrum. The cerebral cortex is not smooth at all, and if you have seen a diagram of a human brain, you will notice that the brain is wrinkled all over. These wrinkles or folds are referred to as gyri, and the fissures or the spaces between each fold are referred to as sulci. These folds and spaces allow for the accommodation of more neurons in the cerebral cortex, that allows for more complex thought processes to be accomplished by the brain. By comparison, if you have the opportunity to view diagrams of the brains of a dog or a bird, their folds are comparatively lesser. The presence of folds in the brain allows our brains to function at a higher capacity, and gives us the ability to speak, read, learn, and various other activities that we as humans are capable of. The cerebral cortex is divided into several lobes that each have their specific higher brain functions, and these are named for the bones that protect them. The frontal lobe contains the motor areas that allow us to move the body of our own will. Because of the large amount of voluntary muscles throughout our body, it is important that the frontal lobe has a large area devoted to the movement of the body. Because there are two hemispheres, the left hemisphere of the brain controls the right side of the body, whereas the right hemisphere of the brain controls the left side of the body. The frontal lobe also contains the premotor skills, which enables the retention of skills that we have learned over time, which enables the repetition of actions without conscious thought. The prefrontal cortex is essential when it comes to overthinking, as it is associated with the ability to maintain emotional control in the presence of excessive stimuli. It is the part of the brain that determines how we behave when a particular stimulus or trigger occurs, and it allows us to maintain control over our behaviors. This part would come into play when we school our brain to stop overthinking in the presence of our specific triggers. An additional area in the frontal lobe is the Broca's area, which allows for motor speech. This allows the body to make the movements needed to allow us to communicate, and while not an integral part of overthinking, it is vital to the communication process which may cause us to overthink. The parietal lobes are concerned with the interpretation of sensations from the skin and the tongue, and are primarily engaged with the interpretation of these sensations. The temporal lobes of the cerebral cortex are primarily engaged with the interpretation of sense. A portion of the temporal lobe, referred to as the Wernicke's area, is responsible for our ability to interpret and understand speech and communication, and is indirectly responsible for the body's response to triggers for overthinking. Within the temporal lobe as well are the amygdala and the hippocampus, organs of the brain responsible for emotion and memory. The occipital lobes of the cerebral cortex are primarily engaged in the interpretation of visual cues and our spatial awareness. 2.4 The limbic system. This is a subsystem within the nervous system that collectively consists of the thalamus, hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. Summarily, the functions of this system are concerned with the ability of the body to respond in the presence of emotional triggers and arousal. Disturbances within the limbic system are associated with behavioral breaks and improper responses, such as our capacity to overthink in various situations. After this brief lesson in anatomy, you may ask, how does this all relate to overthinking, aside from the more apparent link with our brains and its capacity to create and process information? Each part of the nervous system and the brain is responsible for the intake and interpretation of various stimuli, and the limbic system, among other parts, is responsible for how the body is able to respond to the identified stimulus. Thought takes place when the brain interprets information that it perceives from the sensory neurons, and our responses are then adjusted to accommodate the said trigger. The interpreted information is then converted into electrical impulses, which are transmitted from nerve to elicit the appropriate response from our body. Our neurotransmitters are crucial as they are responsible for the transmission of thoughts from our brain to the rest of our body, and this determines how our body will respond to stimuli and stressor. Modern psychiatry provides solutions in the event that the brain is unable to elicit the appropriate responses, and some of these will be the basis for the techniques that are to be elaborated on in this book as we go along. Chances are that you may bypass this chapter due to its intense focus on anatomy and how thoughts are processed. However, you will note that one important lesson to be gained here is that there is a physical basis on why you overthink, and because there is a basis, it becomes possible to manage overthinking with the proper treatments and strategies. 2.5 Conclusion. There is a reason why our mind and body react the way they do in the presence of certain triggers, and as such, this chapter provided the basis on why we feel the butterflies in our stomach, or the leaden sensation of dread when we feel an ominous trigger about to happen. Though our reactions vary from person to person, as we all have different reactions to different stimuli, they all have a biological basis on why they take place. Because we now know why they take place, we are able to better address and understand how the exercises in this book are able to help us stop overthinking. 3. Self-analysis and its role in overthinking. The onset of this book provided that before you begin to peruse the pages and strategies written therein, it is imperative that you know yourself first. Now, this ability to conduct introspection comes into play. There are a lot of psychiatric theories that involve the use of psychoanalysis, but before we go into detail with this form of analysis, we need to put into context what this entails. Psychiatry defines psychoanalysis as the treatment focused on the discovery of the reasons as to our repressed thoughts, and why we respond to particular triggers and situations in a particular manner, such as overthinking. This is not a viable therapeutic method, however, as most insurances do not cover this form of treatment. Hence, this chapter would help guide you on a journey of discovery to ensure that you are able to understand what makes you overthink. Know thyself is a question best suited here, because it is not only the words of others that can cause our minds to enter into a downward spiral, it is also the way that our body reacts to specific situations. Our reactions are often related to deep-seated traumas that have taken place, and cause our bodies to respond in a particular manner. An essential step in this book now is to recognize this behavior and ensure it gets channeled in as healthy a manner as possible. It is also important to impress upon the reader that control is key. There are certain aspects of our lives, however, that we are unable to completely control, as is the case with those of us who happen to be perfectionists. That said, we can only control outcomes to what is within our limits, and those that go beyond our limits, we simply learn to let go and accept the change. Earlier in this book, we have discussed the importance of acceptance, and how one should let go of circumstance which we cannot change at all. What we can control, however, is our reactions to when our plans go awry. Earlier in this book, we have discussed triggers and your need to identify them. These emotional triggers need to be identified the most, as these are the ones that cause our minds to enter into a maze of overthinking. If you are unsure as to what are your triggers that cause you to overthink, there are guides that can help you determine which situations may be potential triggers. For a situation to be a particular trigger, it is important that you ask yourself, what makes you worry? What makes you procrastinate? What makes you overthink? Summarily, what makes up a trigger for a person is an event that forces you into inaction rather than action. If it is a situation where you find yourself engaged in avoidant behavior rather than immediate action, chances are that these events may be actual triggers that elicit a negative bodily response. Common triggers in a person may include excessive free time. If you are unable to occupy your time, you are provided with ample opportunities wherein you can procrastinate. A bad idea, as this delays your overall thought processes and promotes overthinking, especially the question, what if I had used my time better? Insomnia. Oftentimes our brains refuse to function in their most optimal state due to a lack of sleep, as discussed in Chapter 1 of this book. Because of this fatigued state, normal cognitive functions are dulled, and may cause your brain to spend more time than is usual to solve a predicament, when it normally only requires a simple solution. Poor dietary habits. You are what you eat after all, and if you eat unhealthily, you may just starve your mind of the nutrients that it needs for it to function optimally. Hence, the brain could take longer to process information, which then leads to overthinking. These are just some of the common triggers, however, these can vary in accordance with a person. Due to our individuality, it is expected that each of us has various triggers in the environment that cause us to overthink. While it is possible to avoid these triggers, the best possible remedy that can be obtained from your introspection of self is to know first why and how these triggers affect you as a person, and how you can do better to respond to these triggers. We cannot control when and where these triggers appear, so we cannot simply engage in an avoidant state. What we can control is how our mind and body respond to these triggers, and subsequently master our own responses and prevent overthinking. Hence, there is the need to fully understand that you have your own limitations. On a personal level, before you engage in the identification of triggers, it becomes necessary first to comprehend that you are only human. You are not a machine designed to foresee every single possibility that could take place, and devise 100 protocols in your mind to counteract every single possibility. You are not precognitive, and you are not meant to predict every single outcome for a given situation, that you may begin to react with the right solution. You have limitations, you are a flawed person. You are not perfect. Once you accept that, you are able to appreciate your personal limitations and understand that regardless of your intellectual level and tactical precision, no one can predict every outcome. Regardless of how meticulously planned you make every detail, there will always be an outlier ready to throw a spanner into the works and upset every aspect. Here you can control how you react. You have two choices. you can mentally hide in a labyrinth of your thoughts, or you can tackle the issue head-on with your available options. There are always situations that will always be outside of your personal control, and that is all right. That is okay. That is what makes us human, and that would be all right. It is only when we accept our limitations that we are able to grow as a person, as one person cannot hold the solution to every problem. We learn, we adapt, and we overcome our tendency to overthink. Let's test this out with a few situations. Imagine that you are in a final examination that makes up a large percentage of your grade. You have studied for the better part of a month, and you have listened to several hours of audio lectures. You have answered the questions to the best of your ability. Now you hear your classmates discuss the questions and overhear that their answers are different from yours. How would you react to this type of situation? Ordinarily, you would want to look up your answers to verify that you had answered correctly. While this is part of review, however, this is an action that would inevitably cause you to spiral into overthinking. How? When you revise your answers and you determine that either you are wrong or you are correct, this would lead to more what-if situations wherein you are compelled to think upon the other answers you have provided to each question, and subsequently, you begin to overthink more and more until you realize that you are deeply mired in self-doubt. What can you do? Let it go. I do not refer to the Disney song, but we can take a few lines from it, specifically that if you find that you keep your distance and avoid these revisions, you are able to free yourself to do other productive items. It is imperative that you ground yourself first with solid assurances. In the previous situations, you had prepared yourself to the best of your ability, and that you have done everything that you could. You can no longer change your answers, it is all up to your professor, and this is a factor that you cannot change, no matter how many revisions you do afterwards. It will only make you worry. Instead, let go of control and live in the moment. Here is another scenario. You were contacted by the Human Resources Department of a company that you have always wanted to apply to. Weeks before your appointment, you have done your research, you have prepared your best suit, and you practiced interview questions. On the day of your appointment, you were able to answer the questions posed by the interviewer. You did not hear from them for a couple of days, until such time that you were contacted by the HR department that you were offered the job. What would you do? You have two scenarios at this point. First, you begin to ruminate on the what-ifs of every single instance. You wore the wrong colored tie due to some random workplace article on power dressage, you wore the wrong cut of suit, your socks didn't match, your hair was messed up. You thought you missed the questions, you missed a cue from the interviewer, or you felt that your answer was weak. Your interviewer made a particular notation on your CV with regards to a particular response to a question posed, and you are not sure if this was a good idea or not. You forgot to respond to the HR, who notified you that you have made the interview. The moment you got the job, you immediately think, oh, I was the second choice, that's why they took so long to message me that I have it. Now, if you feel the observations in the previous paragraph apply to you in the first place, now would be a great time to look at how quickly thoughts can spiral down the moment you begin to think on the what-ifs in a given situation. How would this even help you? Truthfully, it presents no help at all. On the contrary, it only adds to your worries that could negatively impact your overall quality of health. This is because of the way the mind was conditioned to react to this type of stimulus. Second scenario. You graciously thank the interviewer for their time, and leave with the knowledge that you have done all that you can to ensure that you get this job. Delays in their contact time mean that they have also contacted other potential candidates, and not check on every potential shortfall that you may have on your CV or in your interview answers. You know that you have done all in your power to get the job, and that control does not lie in your hands, but in the hands of the person who has interviewed you. If your thoughts follow this angle or begin to follow this angle, what benefit do you feel that you have obtained? In all honesty, you would most likely feel a sense of liberation in that you are no longer fettered by expectations, and you have chosen to live and let go. Come what may, if you will, because you cannot turn back time and alter outcomes. You have chosen to live in the moment, and you are all the better for it. Now re-examine the two situations with their two scenarios. You will notice that the two reactions are both positive and negative in nature, and the positive scenarios involve the need to let go of control, and the negative scenarios involve consistent ruminations. It is apparent which scenario would net you the most benefits, and this is heavily dependent upon the way you view your environment. If by nature you are a naturally optimistic person, or at least have the tendency to give the benefit of the doubt, you are in a good place. This means that you have understood that not every single aspect of your life can remain under your control, and that you have accepted that there are other factors that could affect your outcome. This means that you are the type of person to make the most from a situation, rather than let the event affect your entire psyche. You are aware of your own limitations and have embraced them. If, on the other hand, you immediately opted for the negative scenario, and you are naturally pessimistic, then it would still be a good place, because you are at least aware that you do have a negative outlook on how you are able to react to a given scenario. That said, there are habits that need to be broken to ensure that you are able to break this negative reaction that leads you to overthink. One of the key strategies employed to prevent overthinking is to filter. When you begin to filter your thoughts, you will realize that some of these what-if scenarios that were built up in your psyche were rather trivial in nature. This is not to say, however, that this belittles your thoughts. No, rather, the what-if scenarios need to be viewed from a different perspective. Take the job interview scenario, for instance, where one of the potential what-ifs relates to the use of power suits and color. Now take this with a more pragmatic approach. Think about how trivial the cut of the suit and its color would be to your job interview. True, you can fret about how you dress, but what for? Unless you happen to apply at a fashion magazine, it will have no outcome whatsoever on your interview. Your interview responses may give cause for concern, however, this is how you can filter this. You have prepared your utmost for that very moment, you have practiced, your CV is updated, and you are prepared. Repeat. You are prepared. Repeat until you have this in your headspace. Why? It may sound like a meditative mantra, which it was meant to be, because you know yourself better than anyone else. You know that deep down you have prepared and have done everything that is humanly possible to prepare for this outcome, and you can assure yourself that you did well. Why would you need to filter out thoughts? This is because when you chronically overthink, this leads to an instance referred to as a cognitive distortion. These are inaccuracies perceived in events that would cause you to break down into a negative spiral. It is a distortion because, as the mind is accustomed to look at every event from a particular perspective, in the case of distortion, it is more of the mind refuses to accept a positive outcome, and instead looks for a more negative outcome, which it is more accustomed to. Distortions can be remedied, however, with the use of restructuring. Use the classic approach of a glass half full rather than a half empty approach in how your mind interprets various triggers. Hence, at this point, you would have to look deep into yourself and determine what makes you tick, and what drives you to react in particular situations. If you find that you have often been belittled and ignored in the past, this would most likely lead to a negative outlook, whereas if you have been readily accepted and supported, this would lead to a more positive outlook. However, this is a topic that a therapist cannot speak clearly about, as you would know more about your past and be able to answer this question better. At the end of this chapter, you would be able to understand why you are such a crucial piece of the puzzle. Why you are the key to stop yourself from the behavioral habit of overthinking, and how you are able to restructure your thought in a manner that stops the onset of overthinking and see events from a different perspective. When you begin to restructure your thoughts to accept a different perspective, we are now able to deviate from other negativistic behaviors such as catastrophism and blame. To elaborate on this, we refer first to catastrophism, and if you are familiar with the word catastrophe, you can glean that you are able to make a disaster from a minor incident. a mountain out of a molehill, if you will. A great example of this would be if the interviewer at your job interview made a sound as you answered your question. Catastrophism in this would entail that your mind begins to think that the interviewer disapproves of your response and would ignore the rest of your answers and cause you to lose out on a job. If we restructured this could be a more innocuous scenario. The interviewer wanted to simply clear their throat, or the interviewer wished to signify you to continue with your response. There are a variety of reasons as to why an event occurs and why certain outcomes take place. It is important at this point to restructure your reactions to a more relaxed outcome and encourage the acceptance of other scenarios to stop overthinking. Blaming, on the other hand, is more of a defense mechanism that shifts the blame for your overthinking onto a particular person or event. For instance, if we take the same scenario, and you still landed the job, you blame the interviewer or the HR personnel for various unknown reasons that caused you to worry about the outcome of the job. You would most likely think that they misplaced your papers, or that they are highly incompetent at their job, which was the main reason why you were delayed in your notification that you got the job. Before this gets escalated, we need to stop this and rewind. Now try it out yourself and restructure your thoughts on your reactions to this type of scenario. Take note of what you felt as you restructured your thoughts. Aside from the fact that it would be absolutely erroneous to immediately blame a person for a particular circumstance, it would also entail that you refuse to accept a particular scenario that has taken place. But do take note that you have also managed to land the job regardless of the time that has passed. It would be pointless to shift the blame onto a person just because you did receive a benefit. Leave it at that. Continue to restructure your thoughts the next time you feel compelled to overthink. You will be able to appreciate over time how your what-ifs become smaller when viewed with a different mindset. 3.1 Conclusion. There are always two sides to every story, so we are told. This holds true on how we are able to react to particular situations. We often feel unwarranted sensations and reactions as to why a particular event took place, and we often find ourselves in the dilemma that we often ascribe motives to a particular reaction we noticed in an effort to rationalize it. However, our mind can really make a mountain out of a molehill, and in an effort to stave off reactions that can otherwise escalate a situation that should have been benign in the first place, our mind tends to overthink, and as a result overreacts physically, mentally, and emotionally. Because of this, an imperative step prior to reaction in any situation would be to stop and think. When we are able to stop and think, we close off our emotions and let our more rational minds act on the situation that it has identified as a threat to its integrity. This way, the mind is able to properly visualize the situation for what it is, and react in the most proper manner possible. For the mind as an iceberg. This chapter is not in reference to a mind that is cool, calm, and collected. Rather, it is reference to the fact that the mind is similar to an iceberg, in that there is more to the mind than what one sees on the surface. Icebergs are famously or infamously known to show at least part of their structure above water, while it can be quite large below the water. The iceberg is now a metaphor for your mind, because while it can be apparent as to how your mind actually functions, if you go beneath the surface level, you will find out there is more to a person than actually meets the eye. In the previous chapter, we had discussed about self-awareness and how our experiences have helped shape our reactions towards certain stressor and stimuli over time. It is our knowledge of our past events that helps us discover a solution and come up with a different method by which our reactions to certain stimuli can be restructured. Now, this knowledge comes into full play when we explore the subconscious mind as identified by famed Austrian psychoanalyst Dr. Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939, in his psychoanalytic theory, which must be explained before we explore the subconscious mind. 4.1 Psychoanalytic theory. The psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud was conceptualized in Vienna at the turn of the century. While the theory in itself was comprised of the various contributions of other psychologists, it is undisputed that the theory itself was originally conceived by Freud. The theory itself is not widely accepted by other psychoanalysts who have proposed their own theories, but for the purposes of this discussion and the content of this chapter, this will be the scientific basis to determine why our minds and bodies react the way they do in the presence of a certain stimulus. What does the theory entail? You might also wonder about the relevance of this theory to overthinking. The psychoanalytic theory provides that all human behavior, the positive and negative aspects, stem from a cause, and that it is possible to determine this cause. Hence, to apply this to the current context, you will now understand why the previous chapter required you to understand yourself first, and ensure that you were able to identify the potential stressor that cause you to overthink. This part of the psychoanalytic theory, referred to as the deterministic theory, states that all behavior, all our reactions stem from a cause, and this cause can be determined. This is where our past experiences come into play, as our mind has associated this type of reaction with a particular stressor. Let us put this into an illustrated example. You sat for an examination that you have studied for. Though you know that you have prepared well, you did not score as high as you would have. Immediately your mind begins to spiral on what you think you did wrong and what your consequences are. But the question is, what caused your mind to react that way? Aside from the what-ifs and what you did wrong, which in themselves are valid questions, and the more apparent consequence of what happens when you fail to achieve the needed grade, you feel that sort of dread that you associate when you take home a low-scoring paper to your parent. Perhaps you were given a stern dressing down by your parents, and certain privileges at home were revoked as a form of comeuppance for that sin. Perhaps this has occurred in such frequency that this reaction was deeply ingrained into your mind, which was impressed upon you in your formative years with such frequency, that your mind carried over the same sensations into adulthood as a form of self-preservation. Now take a step back and view this with what you know of the deterministic theory. Your behavior was to break into overthinking with what-ifs. The cause was because of your fear of failure ingrained by your parents, theoretically. Determined. Yes, because you managed to get to the root of the issue and explore the deep-seated issues that invaded your mind and caused you to react this way. If this was impressed upon you so much that your mind learned it, then it becomes possible to unlearn it and break free of overthinking. Now that we have made this more concrete, we go back to the exploration of the other parts of the psychoanalytic theory. Freud theorized that the reactions and behaviors that were manifested by a person were a result of the suppression of sexual impulses and desires. Now, in a more contemporary context, this is not to say we are frustrated simply because of our inability to satisfy our sexual urges. That is a more primal state. Our reactions, however, are derived from our suppressed inability to express our emotions at a particular instance, and these unexpressed emotions have turned inwardly so that we, and our minds in particular, manage to self-implode within ourselves. Freud developed his theory after several sessions with his patients, who were mostly women, whose hysterical behaviors were attributed by him to childhood trauma and the inability to move on from the psychosexual stages of development that he had developed. While these conflicts remain unresolved, so will the reactions of these women be. In a contemporary context, this to say, that a part of our traumas that cause us to overthink derives from our reactions to certain behaviors in the past. In the earlier example, we feel dread from a low mark in an exam due to the behavior of our parent when a bad exam was given to them to inspect. Subsequently, to be able to adequately restructure a reaction, we need to first understand why our mind reacts that way, hence, the need to understand yourself in the previous chapter. In line with the psychoanalytic theory of Freud, he explored further the various states of the mind, the id, ego and superego, which will be discussed further in this chapter as we continue the exploration of this metaphor. 4.2 Beneath the surface. Now that we have discussed the basics of the psychoanalytic theory of Freud, we delve further into the mindscape that he theorized existed. We have often heard about the duality of man, where mankind has been segregated into a dichotomy of good and evil. Freud believed that rather than two aspects, there are three aspects that exist within the mind of a person: the id, ego, and superego, and that these three aspects comprise the personality structure of a person. You may ask, what do these three have to do with the concept of overthinking? At this point, to be able to make the strategies work in the book for you, you have to grasp that your reactions to the stressor and stimuli that cause you to overthink are deeply rooted within your psyche, and that when you overthink, your mind has shifted to the use of one of these personality components theorized by Freud to form part of our innate personality. We break down each component and discuss them individually. The id, if we were to compare it, would be the devil on your shoulder, but it would be erroneous to blame it for every misdeed that you commit. The id goes deeper than that, as it is representative of the base and innate natures of our personalities, the primal instincts that drive us, such as the need to seek pleasure, potential aggression, and the impulses that govern our sexual desires. The id, when it comes to overthinking, plays a role with regards to our aggression, particularly our reactions when certain stressors trigger an emotional response from us. The id, when triggered, is responsible for instant gratification, and is one of the causes for overthinking in that it triggers impulsive behavior that causes a person to operate on instinct and has no regard for societal norms. This is not to say, however, that the id is wholly base in the way that it acts. Recall that it was initially described as the base instincts, and if we explore that further, that means that the id is responsible for our survival instincts, such as the need to preserve ourselves, and this includes our minds. While overthinking in itself requires the use of higher brain processes, the use of the id in our personality means that the mind instinctually tries to preserve itself through a survival instinct, which it has eventually associated with overthinking. If there is a stressor, the first thing our mind does is to overthink, and that is where the id of our personality comes into play. Because of this, it is entirely possible to ensure that the id would be able to make newer associations and survival instincts that are not entirely reliant on the ability of the mind to overthink. To counteract the id and its base natures is the part of the personality known as the superego. The superego is responsible for the part of our personality that requires the involvement of morals and ethics, values, and the need to adhere to societal and familial expectations. Where the id acts on its baser instincts, the superego functions on the most analytical and logical level, with the use of higher brain functions. Where the id was earlier compared to the devil on your shoulder, the superego is the angel on your shoulder, and now you have a reasonable dichotomy that governs your thought processes as per the psychoanalytic theory proposed by Freud. You might expect that because this is a more positive representation of the personality, that the superego would have no role to play in overthinking. The superego, representative of the morals and ethics, would be useful, in that it helps you come up with a more ethical and moral outlook when it comes to your reactions when presented with a particular stressor. It also causes your mind to ensure that any reactions that the id attempts to engage in adheres to societal norms to ensure that you are not given another reason to overthink. Where does the ego come in then, as the third aspect of our personality? The ego, in this context, is different from the ego that we often associate with highbrow individuals. The ego is the balance between the baser instincts of the id and the morals of the superego, and it is this behavior that enables us as a person to adapt and mature in accordance with the situations that we are faced with, to ensure that we are able to function normally in the world. It is theorized by Freud that when the ego of our personality is unable to balance the id and the superego, anxiety results. These three factors were determined by Freud to be involved with the behavior of a person. However, this is just the surface level of the iceberg metaphor that our mind is. There are deeper levels of the mind that will be explored some more as the basis for all our behaviors. 4.3 Motivation of our behavior. Aside from our id, ego, and superego, Freud believed that there were other parts of our mind that governed reactions to the environment. He categorized these as the conscious, preconscious, and the subconscious minds. The conscious mind is the part of our mind that is aware of the environment around us, hence the attribution of the adjective conscious to that aspect of our mind. It is the part of the mind that is constantly aware and is in full control of what it perceives and interprets, and causes us to react in accordance with the stimulus or stressor that it has identified. For a more illustrative sample, the conscious mind is the part of our mind that allows us to act more rationally if we are in the midst of an examination or in a job interview. It is what allows us to act like a rational person when we are posed with questions, and we are able to adjust our reactions to a hard question, or our responses to a more difficult question. The preconscious mind is akin to the shallow waters of a pool where the memories are located, and it requires a little effort to recall them. This is the part of the mind that is not currently part of the awareness of a person, however, it is one part that can be readily recalled. Think of the common applications of learning by rote and stock knowledge, as these fall under this part of the preconscious mind. You would also include the memories of your experiences throughout your life, such as what did you last do at a particular location, or when you were able to finish a particular task. It is not in your immediate consciousness, but you would be able to recall this. The most important part of the mind in this context of overthinking is the subconscious mind. In the iceberg metaphor, the subconscious is the deeper part of the iceberg that most people are barely able to perceive, but manifests itself every once in a while. The subconscious, as defined by Freud, is the combination of thoughts and emotions that unconsciously motivate a person. How is this? What would you do if you were confronted by a person that you cheated on an exam question? Would you scream at them? Or would you calmly confront them with proof that you did not? These are some of the factors that determine how a person reacts to a particular situation. Your subconscious comes into play with the presence of defense mechanisms, of which overthinking could be considered part of. Here, before a memory becomes part of your collective subconscious, it will always start off as a conscious memory. Recall the discussion earlier, wherein certain reactions have been often repeated to the point that your mind reacts in a certain manner when confronted with the same or similar stressor. This reaction is deeply rooted in the subconscious, which means that though you are unconscious about this reaction, your body automatically responds in a manner that it has learned over time, and was suppressed due to a traumatic incident that led to this subconscious memory formation. It is the belief of Sigmund Freud that of all the parts of the mind, it is the subconscious that has the greatest effect on our motivations, and subsequently, the reactions we have towards various stressor that we encounter. These subconscious thoughts often manifest themselves in the forms of Freudian slips, when we say what is on our minds rather than what we should have said in a more diplomatic manner. The subconscious mind is the collection of our emotions and thoughts that are at once irrational, emotional, and is generally unaware of what is around it. Hence, care must be exercised to ensure that we are able to keep our subconscious under control. Despite this and its apparent repression, the subconscious mind still manages to exert a greater influence over our decisions, emotions, and our interactions with people and the world around us. Because of the repression that takes place, our subconscious can be likened to the collection of all our baser instincts, the primal nature of our minds, that react upon instinct and without sense of logic upon the stressor and triggers that may be perceived by the mind. It is through the control of the preconscious mind that Freud theorizes that our minds are able to adequately control what influences our subconscious exerts upon our behaviors. To relate this to the id, ego, and superego, the id comprises most if not all of the subconscious mind, whereas the ego and superego form part of the preconscious and conscious minds in that they are able to effectively control the way our minds react to the stimuli in the environment. 4.4 Context in overthinking. Overthinking can be considered as a form of defense mechanism of our mind that is deeply rooted due to repressed events in our preconscious and subconscious minds. It is the means by which our ego is able to defend itself when it finds itself in the presence of a stressor and environment. Most ego defense mechanisms exist in order to help the ego preserve its integrity. These defense mechanisms are governed by reactions deeply rooted within our baser instincts, and are often utilized by the mind in the presence of traumatic thoughts, emotions, and events. In this context, the triggers that cause us to enter into a state of overthinking. The defense mechanisms, though utilized in the preservation of the ego of the mind, are based on the reactions that are suppressed in the subconscious mind. Hence, most people who do engage in these defense mechanisms are generally unaware that they have engaged in this type of behavior. This means that when you do overthink, your mind does it on its own volition, and not because you willingly chose to. It is because of experiences in the past that have formed part of your formative years and are deeply embedded into your mind, that your mind opts to resort to overthinking in an effort to reassure itself that it was not wrong. 4.5 Conclusion. Hence, it is essential to the success of these strategies that you are able to understand why your mind reacts in such a manner, to ensure that you are able to properly restructure these reactions in a more positive manner. This would allow you to preemptively curb the tendency of your mind to overthink, and overall, allow your ego to maintain its integrity without the subconscious need to resort to the process of overthinking. This way, the newer strategies would be able to take root and help you restructure your subconscious to adapt a newer method to defend itself from any potential stressor and triggers it may identify in the environment. Minds have learned behaviors over time, and it then follows that at some point with the proper exercises, the mind is able to unlearn past behaviors and learn newer methods by which it can properly cope without the need to resort to overthinking. 5. The impact of overthinking. We start this chapter first with a bit of positive reinforcement. Your mind is not a machine. You are not a machine, no matter how deplorable your work situation may be. You may have a colleague who works like a machine and manages to accomplish all of their tasks at the same time. However, that does not mean they are better than you. For one, the brain, even at its most optimal capacity, can only focus on one task at a time. Therefore, if you happen to meet a person who claims that they are great multitaskers, take it with a grain of salt. Multitaskers may have accomplished numerous tasks in a single work shift, true, but their quality of work may have suffered in the interim. This means you would not have to deplore your amount of work, as long as you did it well in the end. That aside, overthinking itself carries certain effects on the body that we have discussed in Chapter 1 of this book. The process of thought is directly linked to the limbic system of the body, wherein, through this system, it is linked with the same organs that form part of the nervous system that controls every part of the body. These organs were discussed in Chapter 3 of this book, and their respective roles in the process of thought. Now in this chapter, we discuss the more physical impacts of overthinking that result from the non-stop processing of the nervous system, and how it affects the body. You might wonder at first, how would the body be able to react to stressor? This is because of neurotransmitters that carry the impulses from neuron to neuron. These are epinephrine and norepinephrine, and they are secreted often in instances where the flight or fight mechanism of the brain is triggered. If we apply it to the current context, then this is applicable to when the body is in a state of constant overthinking and enters a negative spiral. This can be construed as a form of the fight mechanism where the mind enters a state that it acts upon instinct and attempts to come up with solutions that would be able to address the situation at hand. These hormones, when first secreted, would be useful, as it shuts off certain unimportant parts of your body and focuses all of its energy into the performance of certain functions such as increased blood pressures and pulse rates to increase the amount of blood flow to the brain, and increased respiratory rates to increase the amount of oxygen saturation to the brain, all aimed with the effort to ensure that the brain has the energy that it needs to develop a solution to extricate itself from the stressor it finds itself confronted with. 5.1 Neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that are manufactured within the nerve cells in the body, and are primarily used for the transmission of nerve impulses across synapses. We have discussed impulses in Chapter 3 of this book, and how the electrical impulses are converted into chemical impulses and carried by the neurotransmitters across the synapse, where the impulse is then converted into the electrical version of itself for rapid transmission. This is an understatement of the functions of the neurotransmitters, as you might obtain the impression that there is only one neurotransmitter that is responsible for the execution and conveyance of electrical impulses across a synapse. Neurotransmitters are categorized as excitatory or inhibitory. Excitatory neurotransmitters are those types of neurotransmitters that stimulate or initiate actions within cells. Examples of these types of neurotransmitters include dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and glutamate. Inhibitory neurotransmitters, in contrast, are neurotransmitters that inhibit or stop actions within cells. This includes serotonin among other neurotransmitters. In context for this discussion, we devote the discussion to the excitatory neurotransmitters and the actions of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are not only neurotransmitters that are secreted by the neurons, they are also hormones that are released by the adrenal medulla, the middle portion of the adrenal glands which sit on top of the kidneys. In psychiatry, norepinephrine is the most abundant neurotransmitter, found mostly in the medulla oblongata of the brain. It is responsible for actions that involve the ability to learn, pay attention, create memories, induce sleep, and initiate wakefulness within a person. Epinephrine is derived from norepinephrine and controls the flight or fight response of the body. Now, if they are neurotransmitters, how do they relate to the functions of the body? Epinephrine and norepinephrine, as mentioned earlier, are released by the adrenal glands and are also classified as hormones. You will find them under a more familiar name, adrenaline and noradrenaline respectively, and perhaps you will come to understand how they are now sufficiently able to exert such effects on our bodies. Both substances are released only in situations that the body and mind consider stressful, and are responsible for the flight or fight response. Norepinephrine, where it is abundant in the nervous system, is released lesser in these instances, and is responsible for physical reactions such as the initiation of vasoconstriction, the action where the blood vessels narrow, of the skin, viscera, and the muscles of the body. This action helps raise the blood pressure within the body and helps increase blood flow to the brain. Epinephrine, on the other hand, is more abundantly secreted in the body in stressful situations, and is responsible for the increase in the pulse rate and the amount of force used to make the heart contract, and allows the blood vessels in the skin and organs to narrow, while it allows the blood vessels in the muscles to widen. The same substance causes the widening of the bronchioles to promote an increase in air exchange, reduces the contractions in the digestive system, causes the liver to convert glycogen to glucose to provide the energy needed by the body, increases the use of body fat as an energy source, and promotes an increase in cell respiration for increased energy generation needed by the body to function in a stressful situation. While initially useful on the onset of a stressful situation, a prolonged state of exposure to the stressor or trigger would be detrimental to the continued physical health of the body. Similarly, even if the stressor or trigger had apparently dissipated, but if the mind continues to perceive its presence, the body would still be in a continued state of stress. This would entail the continued secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine, both the hormone and the neurotransmitter, in both the brain and in the bloodstream. This means that the known effects of the hormones would continue to exert their effect on the body in the belief that the body is still in a state of stress, because the mind believes it to be so. The body would be unable to take this form of prolonged stress, hence it begins to manifest the excessive stressor through physical symptoms. In psychiatry, it is theorized that the presence of norepinephrine and epinephrine leads to the occurrence of anxiety in the body, and this is one of the physical impacts provided in Chapter 1 of this book, as a sign that your body begins to suffer from the negative impacts of overthinking. 5.2 Anxiety. Anxiety is defined as the sensation of dread or apprehension that is felt by the body when in the presence of trigger or stressor that the mind perceives to be a threat. Anxiety tends to manifest itself through symptoms that can be physical, mental, emotional, and cognitive in nature. It is unavoidable, as most people at some point in their lives manage to experience anxiety in some form. In its milder versions, it promotes increased activity to the brain to enable it to come up with a solution to address the presence of the stressor that it identifies. It is perfectly normal when it arises in a stressful event, and when it disappears after the stressor has been removed. When anxiety remains after the elimination of a stressor, however, it begins to take on the form of disorder, referred to as anxiety disorders. While there are a variety of anxiety disorders that are manifested in the DSM-V, they all share similar characteristics in that when they do manifest in a person, there are physical, mental, cognitive, and emotional involvement. Why would overthinking be considered as part of anxiety? This is because those diagnosed with anxiety disorders are known to engage in unusual behaviors which include panic attacks without any visible trigger, an unusual fear of events or certain conditions, and sensations of fear and worry that would cause the person to feel overwhelmed. This state of anxiety exists for a prolonged period and would severely impact the life of the person diagnosed with it. Physical symptoms were first mentioned, and you may have a clue as to what these physical symptoms entail. First off, you would have an increased heart rate and pulse rate due to the actions of the epinephrine that course through your system. To determine this, you could simply place your 2 forefingers onto your wrist and count the number of pulsations you feel within 1 minute. If you happen to count 120 beats per minute or more, then your heart rate is elevated. There is a bit of disclaimer though, in that when you do take your pulse rate, you must have been at rest for at least 30 minutes, and you must not have smoked or taken any caffeinated beverage to ensure the accuracy of the pulse rate obtained. The elevation of the pulse rate, once it has been confirmed, would lead to an elevated blood pressure, and you can measure this at your local clinic, or with a sphygmomanometer if you happen to have one at home. You would have to determine your baseline levels though, so it is advisable to have your blood pressure checked at your clinic to ensure accuracy of the reading, and to ensure that other factors other than anxiety are not involved in the elevation of your blood pressure. Needless to say, an elevated blood pressure rate would increase your risk for stroke and hypertension if left uncontrolled, so it is advisable to have your blood pressure monitored on a regular basis, particularly if you have a family history of heart disease. An increase in the respiratory rate is expected, as the blood sent to the brain requires additional oxygenation. As a result, if you are in a state of anxiety, you would expect your respiratory rate or the number of breaths that you take in a minute would be elevated to provide more oxygen to your brain and skeletal muscles. This would be fine if it were not prolonged. However, if the rate remains elevated, you may cause an imbalance in your arterial blood gas levels, which could have their own effect on your ability to think. The physical risks would be greater if you also happen to be diagnosed with a chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, COPD, such as asthma, bronchitis or emphysema, which already lessen your ability to breathe properly. All these 3 are just some of the main physical manifestations that take place with the continued presence of epinephrine in the bloodstream and in the neurotransmitters. Epinephrine and norepinephrine also have their effects on the organs of the body, and the continued tension sent to the skeletal muscles for movements can cause the manifestation of joint pains and muscle aches, which can cause another set of mobility issues and adversely affect the physical health of a person. Anxiety is known as a response to stress in general. Stress finds its basis in the general adaptation theory of Hans Selye, where he divided the bodily reactions to stress into 3 categories. The alarm reaction stage of this theory states that stress causes the stimulation of the body to cause the hypothalamus to trigger the adrenal glands to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the liver to convert glycogen to glucose to meet the increased energy requirements of the body. The resistance stage involves the reduction in the function of the digestive system, such as a decreased number of contractions within it, to ensure that most of the blood supply of the body is diverted to the brain and skeletal muscles. We also see the elevation of the pulse rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rate, which eventually tapers off once the body begins to adjust to the presence of the stressor. The exhaustion stage occurs when a person negatively responds to the presence of stressor, such as in overthinking. Hence, a person who has entered this state has already depleted their energy through the maintenance of the continued levels of stress. Because the person has not properly adjusted to the stressor, the stress levels remain elevated, which increases the detrimental physical effects stress and anxiety have on the body, as discussed in Chapter 1 of this book. A person in a constant state of stress and anxiety would need to properly cope with the stressor and triggers until such time they are able to sufficiently manage it. However, despite the employment of the most ideal coping strategies that form part of the ego defense mechanisms theorized by Sigmund Freud, there are other ways for a person to cope with the constant presence of stressor. However, where there are healthy means to cope with stressor, there are also unhealthy means to cope with these stressor and triggers, of which overthinking becomes one of them. This is because the mind, when it decides to overthink, believes that it will be able to alter the outcome through the repetition of various scenarios. It chooses to hyperfocus on the identification of a solution, to the detriment of the person who overthinks. A person who is unable to properly cope with the presence of stressor and triggers that cause anxiety, and subsequently insomnia to manifest, may potentially resort to the use of illicit medications, and develop an unhealthy dependency on medications to enable them to sleep, to allow them a bit of relief from the headaches and pains, or simply to get away from it all. If the latter phrase alarms you, then yes, there is also the potential for the person to engage in the consumption of alcohol, illicit drugs, and an increased use of tobacco if they happen to be smokers. There would be no need to elaborate on what the consequences of these acts would be on the body if they are utilized on a constant and prolonged basis, and the impacts that these would have on not only the body, but also on the mental health, the cognitive functions, and the emotional interactions of the body. Alcoholism can certainly alienate a person from their family, especially if they happen to be chronic alcoholics, and the interactions between an alcoholic and their family and friends would certainly be impaired, which would lead to a continuation of the cycle of overthinking once the person manages to sober up. The same type of impairment will be obtained from illegal medication use, as this severely impairs the relationship between the person who engages in drug use and their friends and family as well. Tobacco use would not have so much of an impact, especially if persons are accustomed to a person who is a smoker. However, the impacts on pack years would create severe repercussions on the health of the person who is a chain smoker, simply because they are unable to properly cope with the occurrence of overthinking. What is important to impress upon the reader is that though yes, the use of alcohol, drugs and tobacco can give you an escape when you need it the most it can actually give you is a temporary escape from reality. It can never be the way out. The key word here is temporary. Unhealthy mechanisms that you can employ to try to cope with the problem that causes you to overthink are only temporary solutions, and if this path continues, it will only cause more and more problems that lead you into an endless negative spiral that you would have a hard time to break out of. What can be done? The best and most permanent solution would be to ensure that you address the issue that makes you want to overthink. To do that, you would have to ensure that your mind is free from the mental obstacles that it has set up to protect itself from the stressor and triggers. It would be ideal to ensure that the mind is able to restructure the way it addresses potential triggers, and ensure that it is unable to overthink, as it has employed another way to cope with a potential stressor or issue. 5.3 Techniques on how to address a cluttered mind. At the start of this book, it was mentioned that despite the size of the brain, and regardless of how quick a person is on the uptake and claims on the purported ability to effectively multitask, the brain is only able to focus on one object at a time, as the neurons devoted to the process of thought can only engage so much brain power onto one stressor that it has perceived. Earlier in this book, we have discussed about the importance of self-awareness and self-analysis, and the first strategy to do when you feel that you are about to be mentally overwhelmed is to break what stresses you out into smaller issues. The best way to do this is to write it down in the form of a list on a piece of paper. Not digitally, but handwritten. This also gives you enough time to rationalize as to why a particular concern stresses you out, and gives you time to consider. At this point, once you have identified the potential stressor and triggers that cause you to want to freak out, start to break these triggers into simpler components that answer the question, why do these triggers cause you to want to overthink? At the end of it all, you want to look at each reason that you have made as to why these triggers affect you so. When the trigger occurs, you now have a chance to restructure the reaction of your mind to it. Think of it as placing your mind on pause, rewind, and erase as you would a tape on a DVR. This way, you are able to school your mind on a different form of reaction, rather than the one it has been accustomed to. Over time, a constant repetition of this strategy would enable you to think logically, rather than instinctively, and prevent you from overthinking. How would this take place? You may have overthought about a question of faithfulness on your spouse, and where you once began to think about your potential inadequacies as a spouse, you begin to think, not where did I go wrong? You would now restructure your reactions as, I know my spouse is a faithful person, they would not do any act that would cause me to disbelieve in our marriage, or we have a content family life, we are happy and safe, and this causes your mind to stop with the inadequacies and focus on the positives that can cause it to think rationally, and overall stop the inducement of improper behavioral reactions to stressor. Another strategy that you can employ to stop your what-if scenarios from their development into a negative spiral is to have a conversation with the source of your stressor. If you feel that your spouse is unfaithful, perhaps it would be time to have a heart-to-heart, preferably in a non-confrontational manner. If you feel that your work begins to cause you issues, have a conversation with your superior, if and only if they are a reasonable person, although if your superior happens to be the stressor, you may want to go higher up, or if your main stressor happens to be your academics, you would want to have a conversation with your professor or dean about your concerns if they are validated. Once you have a conversation, then you would find it easier to develop solutions that can counteract the natural tendency of your mind to withdraw into itself and begin to overthink as its natural form of defense. On the list that you have made, you would now be able to come up with your own more positive reactions. For instance, if you begin to worry about your marriage, your solution would be to simply speak with your spouse, or remember the actions of your spouse that made you realize that your marriage will always be okay. You would now have some leeway for some creative visualization. If you imagine that you have issues at work, recall a particular concern that you were able to address, and any positive feedback that you may have with regards to the work that you had accomplished. Not only would this help you prevent the potential to overthink, it could also help prevent work burnout. If you find some difficulty with this, engage in some creative visualization and imagine praises heaped upon you. If your stressor happens to be an obnoxious workmate or superior, get more creative and humorous, and imagine that person in a difficult situation. If you find that your classes are difficult, recall memories where you had a great score on your test, or received some form of academic recognition that made this all worthwhile. Through this, you have employed a different strategy, the restructure of your outlook from a negativistic perspective to a more positive one. While it would be safe to acknowledge that there are a lot of negative occurrences that take place within our world, this does not negate the good that there is. This means that if applied to you, you should not ignore the good in your life when there is so much bad around you. Continue to focus on the positives, and soon you would no longer begin to overthink. Continue with these strategies, and soon your mind will have a more positive reaction towards potential stressor, to the point that it will no longer perceive these types of situations as stressor. 5.4 Conclusion. When you surround yourself with a more positive outlook, your mind is able to perceive the world as a better place, and it places your mind in the disposition that it can react more positively to stimuli too. The power of suggestion is such that the mind can easily run with it and act upon what it perceives. Thus, for your mind to react more positively to a trigger, it is important that the mind not be beset by a pessimistic perspective. If the mind thinks in a positive frame, it will react positively. If it reacts negatively, then it will react negatively. It would be apparent as to which outcome is the most favorable for you. 6. The power of CBT. One of the key therapeutic modalities that are consistently used among all forms of psychiatric disorders is cognitive behavioral therapy. You would be mistaken if you take this to be a form of armchair psychology. Rather, as cognitive behavioral therapy is more complex than that notion. The American Psychological Association, APA, defines cognitive behavioral therapy as a form of psychological therapy that can be utilized in a variety of mental health concerns, among them depression and anxiety. It is widely utilized as empirical data provides that the use of this form of therapy, compared against other therapeutic modalities, leads to a significant improvement in the mental state of the person who requires the implementation of the therapy. This form of therapy is reputed to be more effective than other therapies, to include other therapeutic modalities with the concurrent use of medications. You may find some familiarity on the basis of what cognitive behavioral therapy is about. The APA enumerates these as: psychological problems are partly based on faulty or unhelpful methods of thought. Psychological problems are partly based on patterns of unhelpful behavior that were learned. Those who were diagnosed with psychological problems are able to learn alternative ways to better cope with these problems, which would provide symptomatic relief and allow the person to function as normally as they could. If you find this familiar, then this is a summarized repetition of what has been discussed over the past few chapters. For a person to undergo CBT, the person would have to have an acute approximation as to why they are able to react that way, and only when they are able to determine why their reactions are such, they would be able to restructure their reactions to these stressors. 6.1 How can CBT help with overthinking? Cognitive behavioral therapy in the context of overthinking causes you to re-examine your behavior and understand why you react in that manner. Throughout the pages of this book, you have been asked to examine yourself and your past experiences and identify how these events have shaped who you are as a person in the present, and determine how these are able to exert an effect on your mind and how it reacts to current stressor. Throughout the book, you have examined the various reasons as to why your mind opts to overthink rather than engage in other healthier defense mechanisms when it is confronted with a stressor. Through the adaptation of the principles of CBT, it can be gathered that your mind has subconsciously adapted the tendency to overthink based on past experiences, and determined that when confronted with a stressor, the mind considered this as the best method to deal with the stressor. At this point, your mind has engaged in avoidant behavior, and determined that it would be detrimental to your psyche to confront the issue. The three aforementioned principles that govern CBT use the term partly, and in concurrence with the psychoanalytic theory developed by Sigmund Freud, mean that your mind has learned all of these behaviors subconsciously from all the experiences that it had encountered in the past. The other part, the more conscious part, is where you are able to take control of your behaviors and steer your thoughts into a more positive outlook when it comes to stressor, and prevent the recurrence of avoidant behaviors should these stressor manifest. Your chance to rewrite, reframe and restructure your reactions now stems from the application of these principles of CBT to ensure that your mind no longer has to overthink in order to preserve its perceived loss of integrity. Rather, it is now able to channel other, healthier methods to ensure that your psyche remains intact, and that its perceptions of stress remain modified with the help of CBT. 6.2 Cognitive restructures. One of the key strategies that you should employ to stop your negative spirals and constant rumination would be to reframe your reactions, as discussed in the previous chapter. You cannot turn off the ability to think. 1. It is physically impossible to do so, and 2. The ability to think is instrumental to our survivability as a species. Imagine that if you had the ability to do so, and you did it while you drove your car, for instance. Do not even try to imagine how that scenario would play out in your mind, because it cannot happen. When it comes to the ability to process thought, we have discussed on the need to simplify our thought processes, as the presence of so many thoughts can cause us to be overwhelmed. As such, it would be necessary to employ the previously mentioned strategies to filter out thoughts, and to break them down into more simplistic fragments that we would be able to tackle individually. In the previous chapter of this book, you were asked to list down the potential triggers and why you feel that your mind stresses out over these triggers. You were then asked to rationalize your initial reactions to these issues. This would be the first in a series of steps to help you restructure your reactions to stressor. If you begin to fret about your overthinking as an artificial reaction, do not. Our tendency to overthink not only stems from experiences that have been deeply embedded into our subconscious, but also from an evolutionary standpoint where the brain has been molded in such a manner that it opts to critique every single aspect of our actions in the name of self-improvement. While this is not to disparage the concept of self-improvement, which incidentally is an excellent idea, there are better ways to do so than to induce the negative spiral often associated with overthinking. In the previous chapters, the need to restructure and reframe our mental outlook is a key strategy to prevent the tendency to overthink. It is important to remember that you are not a victim of your past. Your past does not define you, and you should not let your past experiences control you. They are just temporal in nature. You were not sentenced to an endless repetition of these habits. You are able to break free from those negative thoughts, and you are consciously capable to stop these habits from their continued negative influence upon your mind. What has been deeply ingrained into your subconscious, you have the capacity to rewrite them. After all, the only person who is in control of your mind is yourself, and you are able to break the unhealthy coping mechanisms that your mind has learned by rote, and develop them into a more positive way to help you deal and cope with your identified stressor. This is where all your self-analysis comes into play, and this is where your knowledge of self becomes most important. Once you have listed your triggers and acknowledged your unhealthy coping mechanisms, you can employ several strategies to help you restructure these thoughts. 6.3 Practical CBT exercises you can do at home. With the increase in healthcare costs, it would be perfectly understandable if a trip to your psychiatrist would be out of the question. There are readily available exercises and strategies that you may employ at home or at work, or simply where you feel at peace. It must be stressed upon you as the reader that for these to work, your state of mind is important. If you happen to find yourself in a stressful situation and you are yet unaccustomed to these strategies, then there is little point to use these. You would need time to ensure that your mind is accustomed to these exercises. Firstly, you would have to adopt the perspective of an outsider. As stated, time and again throughout this book, you would have to a certain degree of self-awareness to ensure that the strategies are able to curb your capacity to overthink on a stressful situation. You would need to adapt the perspective of an outsider to be able to understand the way your mind functions. It would be so easy to get lost inside your thoughts that you believe that there is no other recourse save to overthink. However, when you adapt the perspective from the outside, you are able to realize that some of your worries are relatively inconsequential when they have been broken down into fragments that can be readily addressed. For this strategy to be effective, you have to be impartial and objective in how you view your thoughts. Do not let any part of your personality pervade your perspective on how you are able to view your thoughts. When you are able to view your concerns from a more logical point of view, then you are better able to rationalize them in a manner that allows you to deal with each issue as they crop up. This strategy may be done several times a day, though be sure to do so in a safe place where you can employ the strategy without any other set of eyes on you. You would need to do this in an area where you are free from worries or interruptions, for your objectivity to be absolute. Once you are able to logically rationalize your thoughts, you will realize then that the power that they once held over your thoughts is meaningless, and that will enable you to engage them directly, rather than resort to avoidant behavior. At that point, you have recognized that you are the master of your mind, and your experiences may have shaped you, but they can no longer control you as they once did. Once you have made this realization, you are clear to take on the next step. Identification of thoughts would help objectify your thoughts for what they are, mental constructs that do not have any bearing on how you are able to act as a person, and how they are able to influence you. Thoughts can be oppressive in nature, you cannot deny that. However, they are mutable, and when you are able to see them for what they are, which are theoretical and abstract concepts, you are able to understand that you are able to control the direction your thoughts lead you in. Your thoughts are abstract concepts that may or may not coalesce into reality. What you can do now is to ensure that those thoughts which are pessimistic in nature remain abstract, while you concretize those thoughts that are more positive in their outlook. This way, you are able to consciously control and reframe your mental perspective to stop you from constant rumination. The next strategy to be employed is the ability to say no. Often the simplest and most underrated thought, you would find that you need a certain amount of determination to make this strategy stick, hence you would need a strong willpower and high levels of determination to ensure that you are able to say no to the recurrence of certain thoughts. As it is, you can block off thoughts simply through conscious control. Take a deep breath and choose a mantra. You can simply yell out no, although that may make for an awkward public encounter. You may also opt to sing it out in the form of a song, or whatever floats your boat really. The most important aspect for this part is the creation of a mental block that causes you to stop, reevaluate, and reconsider the direction of your thoughts. This means that you have now become cognizant of the behaviors and indications that make you want to enter into a negative spiral, and you are able to consciously control your thoughts to actively prevent this. You may resort to other strategies to sublimate your desire to overthink. A more useful one, as stated, would be the creation of a list of tasks. This way, you are able to determine which tasks you have safely accomplished, and whenever you feel the urge to fret about a task that was left undone, you do not have to worry about whether or not you have accomplished the task, as you would have to simply consult your checklist for confirmation that you have done so. This also ensures that you have identified your potential triggers that can cause you to enter that downward spiral, and break free from that tendency. Sublimation is a valid ego defense mechanism, and the employment of this would be therapeutic, as it is considered as a healthier way to cope, provided that the method you employ is in itself healthy. Distraction would serve a purpose, and allow you to reframe your reactions, particularly if you are prone to fits of anger, should you be confronted with the stressor. A similar strategy to this would be the commonplace strategy, to count to 10 whenever you feel that you want to have an argument. This way, you are able to avoid any expression of anger, which can lead to other problems, but you are able to channel your brain power into other activities. This ability to channel your brain power into other activities serves as the basis by which you are able to adjust your thoughts accordingly, and avoid the pitfalls that can cause you to overthink. 6.4 Conclusion. Be sure to sublimate with activity that you find pleasant. Recall that the use of substances is not recommended, as the use of them is an expression of avoidant behavior, which is not desired in this book. A hobby would be the most common outlet for most people who find themselves with the tendency to overthink. 7. The power of self-awareness. The key to the successful implementation of these strategies is how well you know yourself, and how well you know if these strategies employed in this book will be helpful to curb your tendency to overthink. However, your journey of self-analysis now requires you to go deeper into your psyche, and requires you to understand what makes you tick. Why do you want to find solutions to all the what-ifs? Does this by nature make you a person who wishes to be in control of every situation that you find yourself under? Or do you find a subconscious desire to be the person who is able to find solutions to all of these problems? Are you a perfectionist who cannot stand any flaw in your plan? Or do you wish to ensure that if all goes wrong, that nobody gets inconvenienced by any failure in your actions? In the previous paragraphs, you see various motivations that could be ascribed to yourself, and they are essential in that they determine the best course of action for you to take to curb your tendency to overthink. You know yourself better than anyone else in the world. Those closest to you would have no idea who you are as a person, and that is okay. We would have to understand what self-awareness is in its entirety. It is defined as the ability to take a step back and objectively assess your thoughts and emotions that you express when in the presence of a person or a particular event. There are simplistic forms on how you can continue to exercise self-awareness, such as the detached observation on how you react to a particular stimulus. There are also more complex forms on how you can be more self-aware through an analysis of your emotional interactions in each event. Regardless of how you choose to do it, the determination of how you understand yourself as a person remains the most integral piece to help you curb the tendency to overthink, and therefore remains the most logical step in the treatment of most psychiatric conditions. Recall the iceberg metaphor of your subconscious mind mentioned earlier in the book. The involvement of self-awareness requires that you are able to get to the root of your concerns and address these from the root upwards. This ensures that it becomes possible to restructure your behavioral patterns and reactions, and allows you to develop new means to cope with potential stressor. 7.1 Practical exercises to increase self-awareness. Before you embark on your journey to be more self-aware, it must be noted that first you would have to determine who you are as a person. There are instances, yes, where the duality of our personalities comes into play, as all of us have some good facets, and conversely, we have the bad facets that come out when we are stressed out. The first practical exercise, then, would be to determine what your core values are as a person, as these are central to determine your innate motivations on your journey to be more self-aware. We live in a world where there are so many diversions, and where information can be readily accessed and used to influence the way we think. It would be understandable if you do encounter some difficulties when you try to keep yourself on the straight and narrow, when there are so many possibilities now on offer. To determine what your core values are, you would need first to mentally step back. Practice this step in a safe place, where you can reflect upon what causes you to act the way you do. What motivates you as a person? This step has to be done with solitude to prevent the further stimulation of your thoughts. So in this instance, no loud music, and you would have to eliminate for now any digital influence. No devices are recommended save for a radio or device to play music. You would need to have the ability to filter out all of the filler information and determine what your main character as a person is. Once you have determined what your main values are, it is then that you are able to set a standard by which you should act in the future, and these include the actions that are created by your mind in its subconscious state. Your core values do not have to be more abstract concepts like courage and integrity, admirable as these are by themselves. You may opt for more unusual core values such as non-maleficence, the value of doing no harm to others, and simply to do good in the world. It can be the need to be free to express and explore, and once you make those realizations, those are the main motivators to guide you. Earlier in this chapter we have discussed the potential impact of these core values, and some may be deeply rooted in the desire to make sure nothing else goes wrong, perfectionism, and some simply to ensure no one becomes severely impacted when a plan goes wrong, non-maleficence. A core value would serve as the main means by which all your reactions are set against and are guided by. Therefore, if altruism would be your core value, then all subsequent actions, conscious or unconscious, would be governed by the need to do good for others rather than for oneself. Although if you do wish to be altruistic, do set some limits, as there is also some harm in too much generosity, particularly for yourself. That aside, once you have determined your core values, you would be able to steer your reactions to this ideal, as this has helped you determine who you are as a person. The next exercise would be to differentiate these core values. You can have more than one. You certainly have different reactions and different values from when you are at home or at work, at school or at public. Once you have engaged in the previous exercise, now would be a good time to place what you feel are your values on paper. Categorize them according to home or work, or whichever category you feel is applicable to your life. Once you have listed down each value in their appropriate category, write down in one sentence how each value is incorporated throughout your day. The value does not require that you perform grandiose gestures, but it does require that you are able to live that value every day. Do this for the values that you have placed under the second category. Look through your list and assess which values are similar to each other. You would want to eliminate those that directly contradict each other, such as the need to spend time with family, and the need to keep up with your extraordinary amounts of work. While it is possible to be both a great family member and a breadwinner, there has to be an ample balance of both, otherwise one value would have to be eliminated in favor of the other. For those values that you find are contradictory to each other, list down methods that you feel that you can do to ensure that these values that you do are balanced and do not adversely affect the other values you have chosen. For instance, if you do enjoy your work and you do require a fair bit of travel to do so, you may opt to bring your family, or if not, delegate the task whenever possible. On the list that you have made, add a check mark to those tasks that you feel are achievable within your means. As with the previous chapter, continue to break down each task into systematic lists until such time that they are easier to manage, and therefore more achievable. This also curbs the potential to overthink, especially if you fret over the non-accomplishment of a certain task on your list. Tack the list you made somewhere where you can always see it. Print multiple copies of it and tape it to your monitor, refrigerator door, bulletin board, mirror, anywhere where you could look at it and be reminded of the core values that govern your actions and would deter your mind from its need to overthink, because these values will now steer your mind to actions that allow you to fulfill your core values. If you find yourself in doubt, consider these questions to guide your thoughts. What does my body feel right now? Focus more on the emotional and mental aspects rather than the physical ones. Tiredness is a more valid sensation, as there is physical exhaustion and mental exhaustion, which in itself can really tire out a person. What goes through my mind? Your initial reactions or your more visceral reactions. Remember that on instinct, your id tends to govern situations where you are stressed, and instinctively your mind reacts to its baser instincts to preserve its integrity. What is my mantra? This does not mean that you have to have a repetitive phrase, mind you, but it does refer to an instance where you have to tell yourself to get up and go. This is the sentence that tells you to keep pushing. Even if it does sound a bit self-serving, such as, "Go on, you're almost there. Keep at it," or an equally stronger sentence to motivate you. What are the emotions that go through you right now? You could feel a variety of emotions. If you are cut off in traffic, or if someone cuts in front of you in a queue, you could feel anger, disgust, or disappointment at once. This way, you begin to school your reactions into an action that would be more positive, rather than basic in its response. What do I really want to do? You would want to act instinctively. Yes, there is nothing wrong with that per se. However, instinctive actions may not necessarily be the right form of action. If someone cut you off in traffic, for instance, you would immediately want to honk your horn or yell at the person, because your baser instincts tell you to establish dominance. However, that can lead to road rage, and that would be an improper course of action. Instead, you could opt for the high road and ignore the person, or for a more logical approach and reason out that the person may be in a hurry, is late, or is in an emergency. This also puts a halt into the what-ifs for when you overthink. When you do engage in these exercises, it would be best to start from an area that you feel least attached to, and develop that particular value as you would exercise your body. This way, you are able to strengthen your weakest points and develop positive changes that will eventually reflect on the way you act. Your engagement in these exercises does not entail that you will only move in a positive linear motion from that point onwards. There will always be fluctuations and diversions. What is important is now, you are sufficiently guided on how to better react to these situations. 7.2 Conclusion. Once you have accepted your limitations as a person, it is only then that you are able to enact the changes that would help you flourish and grow as a person. You cannot be perfect all the time, and that is okay. You cannot maintain your equanimity at all times, and that is okay. It is okay to embrace your different values and character quirks as long as you are true to yourself, and that is all that matters in the end. The more you realize this, the less reason you have to overthink on situations that you are unable to control. It is important to let loose and let go of what you cannot control or change. 8. The power of self-confidence. Not to adhere to the stereotypes, but the beauty of self-confidence is such that it immediately makes a person feel better about themselves. All of those advertisements that push these products in the name of self-confidence have got one thing correct: self-confidence is an attractive trait. What you do not need is to purchase these products to make you feel confident, because it comes from within, not from an item that you purchased and use like a crutch because it makes you feel better. Why would self-confidence be essential to you when you overthink? When you overthink, you are not assured that you have taken the best possible method or action to prevent the occurrence of a particular event, or your reactions to a particular stressor. You are not assured when you overthink, if you continue to fret about what if you should have done this task sooner, or moved faster, or an endless plethora of possibilities that you can write your own screenplay at this point on your own multiversal journey. Sarcasm aside, self-confidence is great to the point that you as a person are so assured that what you did is correct, that you have no qualms about not giving a second thought as to whether your action panned out for the best or not. There is a fine line between self-confidence and arrogance, and one involves assuredness with the capacity to accept that they cannot control anything, while one is assuredness in the superior belief that they can do no wrong. Needless to say, you can already tell which trait is most likely to cause a person to overthink, and which trait can cause a person to not overthink. In the previous paragraph, and indeed in the previous chapters, you will find that the ability to accept things as they are would be essential in the need to curb your impulses to overthink. You may think that would be easier said than done, and yes, that would be the case. No person is born innately confident, but they learn to be confident. The same can be said for you, because not only would you forestall any what-ifs because you would have no reason to think so, it would also be a great boost to your self-esteem, which we now build up in this chapter. First, we discuss a bit on the basics of self-confidence. Self-confidence as part of self-esteem is considered a vital part of the mental health of a person as defined by the World Health Organization. Self-esteem can be defined as how we are able to view ourselves as a person, and the value that we place on ourselves. Most of our self-esteem develops from the way we have been raised. When placed in a situation, if you have been raised in a family where you have been loved and supported at all times, and have been encouraged and treated well, you would have a higher level of self-esteem. If you have been raised in a family that consistently pulls you down, then in contrast, your level of self-esteem would be quite low. The latter portion is not necessarily etched in stone, and the later exercises in this chapter would help you counteract this if your family life or domestic life is less than ideal. After all, you cannot help whom you were born to, but you can help who you surround yourself with. There are several ways self-esteem can be lowered, and most of these can occur concurrently with various reasons as to why you overthink. These include instances of bullying or abuse, by a family member, friend, or any other person really. There are no limitations as to who counts as a bully, as long as they are in a position to abuse you and degrade your self-worth. prejudice, discrimination, and stigma. Members of the LGBTQ, other minority groups are often faced with type of instances and can overthink on ways to avoid any negative behavior expressed to them. Work or lack thereof. Work is a stressor, no doubt about it, and it can be either due to a lack of work, a toxic work environment, or a toxic person within your workplace. In an exercise of self-awareness, however, you do need to be aware of any limitations, as this could help you narrow down what in your work gives you disquiet. Physical health is usually a common stressor simply because your mind is able, but your body is unable to commit to any action, and becomes a wellspring of frustration that can cause you to enter a negative spiral. Mental health. The main reason why you bought this book is to stop overthinking, as it has exerted a negative impact on your life. The toll that a detrimental mental health status can exert is such that it would take some time to counteract any unhealthy behaviors and mechanisms that the mind employs. Relationship issues, a common reason that causes one to overthink. There are remedies that have been discussed earlier in this book to counteract these, and your self-confidence is a key component to overcome concerns that involve your relationship. Money, a necessary evil as most would say, as it is a necessity, and the need to earn it can be akin with work, in that your mind is compelled to contrive means to legally earn it. This requires self-esteem that focuses more on your acceptance of limited means, a positive attitude, and a work ethic that motivates you to try harder. Appearances, a commonplace issue and to whom most advertisements appeal to with regards to the improvement of your self-esteem. It is the one that can be immediately felt, however, and there are steps to improve your appearance without the need to undergo any surgical procedure for the sake of aesthetical improvements. Unrealistic expectations are those that we obtain from the media and from what we observe. We often find that some of our friends are able to travel frequently, have their daily iced coffee fix, and post Instagram stories on how fabulous their daily lives are. What these do is set unrealistic expectations on how one is supposed to live their life nowadays, and often sets unrealistic standards on how to actually live. Once your self-esteem is set, you find that you are more content with what makes you happy. To each your own in this instance. Each listed cause for a lowered self-esteem can be deeply rooted in the subconscious, and at some point all of us have encountered low self-esteem due to one of these root causes that cause ourselves to value ourselves significantly lower than others. As a result, our id tends to take over, and causes us to act out in ways that we normally would not. Take for example in a relationship issue where you believe that your spouse comes home late. For those with a great self-esteem and are assured by the knowledge that their spouse loves them deeply, they would simply accept their spouse coming home late. For those with a low self-esteem, on the other hand, they would worry as to why their spouse comes home late, and overthink on the possibility that their spouse has an affair. There are means to remedy this through the use of exercises to build self-confidence, all with a scientific basis. 8.1 Exercises to build self-confidence. You cannot change the way you were raised. In any case, this is because your experiences collectively have shaped the way you react to certain stressor. What you can change, however, is your perspective and how your mind opts to react to these stressor once perceived. We refer now to the client-centered therapy of Carl Rogers, 1902 to 1987, who believed that the client, in this context, you, experienced the world in a different manner than everyone else, and you would be able to answer what you need best. A person through this theory would be able to derive the solutions that they need through a supportive relationship, and as such, be able to cure themselves from what they believe is wrong with them. In this, it is necessary to build up the self-esteem of a person, that they may reach the peak of self-actualization as provided for in the hierarchy of needs of Abraham Maslow. The promotion of self-esteem is grounded in three core concepts as provided for by Carl Rogers. Unconditional positive regard. When you care for yourself, since you are in self-care mode by this point, you need to be non-judgmental, and that your actions for self-care does not hinge on your behavior. How does that work? If you give yourself a little treat, like a new book or an ice cream cone, after a day's good and hard work, that hinges on your behavior. However, if you do the same act regardless of the outcome, this is self-care at its purest because you have accepted your limitations and are still okay with it. Genuineness. You feel that there is a relevant connection with what you say to yourself and what you actually feel. Hence, if you tell yourself that everything is okay, and it actually is, then you do actually manage to perform the self-care that you need, and are assured that indeed everything is as you say it is. Empathetic understanding. You would need a partner for this one, as they would be able to observe you and read you and narrate what they perceive to you. Hence, if your friend reads you and understands that you are able to believe that you are okay with the situation, then your self-esteem would be fine, as you have someone who understands you well, who believes in you. Unconditional positive regard is the most essential of the core concepts, and is central to the concept of self-esteem, as this causes your mind and your ego to lessen its need to employ its defense mechanisms. Exercises that help you build up your self-confidence are also those that help you on your need to be a self-actualized individual. Subsequently, self-actualization requires that you are able to visualize who and where you want to be in life. It does not have to be a completely elaborate and detailed visualization, mind you, but it does involve the desire to be fulfilled in your life. Set a goal that is simplistic enough for you and achievable. Similar to how you would formulate a research paper, your goals need to be scientific. In this context, you would not need any form of science, however, as your goals would have to depend now on your ability to make your idea work. To reach a goal, you would have to work on a goal, and as such, you would have to show some effort to have a basis that you are on your way and are desirous to achieve self-actualization. Measurable, in that you are able to see development. There is a precarious position here, in that you would at some point compare your progress with others. Recall that earlier it was reiterated that you grow and go at your own pace, so do not compare your progress with anyone. It is important that you are on the path of progression. As long as you keep growing and going, that is all that matters. Achievable. Set realistic expectations for yourself in that you are able to easily achieve what you set your mind to. If you are a student, you could always aim for a set amount of study hours per day or per week. It all depends upon your circumstances and what you intend to achieve. Relevant. Your goals for self-actualization must be line with the tasks and exercises that you do. For instance, if you plan to study and score high on your examinations, it would be incongruous to also plan to make a playthrough of a video game at the same time. If you plan to have more family time, in the same vein, it would be contradictory if you intend to increase your work hours. Time-bound. You may choose to include or disregard this when you set your goals, but a reasonable space, like a 5-year plan, would ensure that you are able to set boundaries for yourself and prevent procrastination itself a reason for overthinking. Now, to start to build up your self-confidence, it would be a great idea to look to your past achievements. Whenever you feel down, look back at a memory, an object, or a picture that would remind you that you have done something worthy of remembrance. Accomplishments are great boosters to your self-confidence. If you won a contest, great. If you achieved a distinction in your class, good. If your teacher wrote you a compliment on a paper, amazing. Basically, any event that made you feel that you were on top of the world would really boost your self-confidence, and it would be perfectly fine to reminisce on those moments, especially when you doubt your self-worth. Do not let anyone stop you. No one can take those moments from you. Haters. Ignore them. Doubters. Ignore them. In the previous chapter, we have discussed about the identification of your core values and goals, as these goals help you stay motivated and true to yourself. Now, your identification of core values help you determine what is important to your self-actualization. If you feel that you need to ensure that no one become inconvenienced by a particular mistake, great. When this is applied to overthinking, however, this means that though you are unable to perform as expected, you are able to brush it off and learn from the moment. You do not find the need to ponder upon the what-ifs. As the cliché provides, there is no use in crying over spilled milk. All you can do is learn from your mistakes and start over stronger. Control your mind. Throughout this book, it was stressed on how important your ability to control and manage your mind is. Comparisons to a web browser with several tabs open are humorous at first glance, but you will eventually want your mind to be fully organized and compartmentalized to ensure that your mindset in each situation is proper. If you are in the office, your mind will be on work mode and not on party mode. If you are at home, you want to be on home mode rather than work mode. Compartmentalization would be also useful in the filtration of your thoughts. Negative thoughts are to be treated like the spam emails in our inboxes, simply toss them in the trash. You are not expected to do this overnight, and as such, this exercise takes time to be achievable. Aside from this, a sub-exercise would be to ensure that whenever a negative thought begins to make itself known, to change this negative into a positive thought. Recall a fond memory, imagine a scenario, and this would help prevent the occurrence of a negative thought. Commitment. Yes, all of these are basically theoretical in essence unless you decide to make the commitment. Simply, if you want to achieve all of this, you need to commit to work hard for it. If you believe that you are able to achieve your goals and that you are very determined to do so, then go for it. Do not let any naysayers dissuade you from the achievement of your goals, nor should you let what others say stop you from your progressions. After all, if we believed all our critics, we would not get anywhere, and if you opt to listen to your negativistic thoughts, no one would really progress. Take a chance and do not let go. Step 2 of the exercise involves your need to begin the process of self-actualization, and this includes the need to accept that you will make mistakes, but you refuse to let these define you and bring you down. At this point, your mental fortitude is sufficient enough to withstand any criticisms, and you are single-mindedly focused towards the achievement of your goals. Under this step, there are a few key exercises that need to be done. One of the key steps would be to build your knowledge base. For one, if say you want to have a self-sufficient supply of food for you and your family, you would need to know all sorts of information about plants and fertilization. Similarly, if you plan to be better at your job, you would have to learn new skills in order to be updated and relevant to the ideals of your company. As a student, you are expected to learn more about the subject matter of the examination that you intend to study for. The next step is to start small. Marco Pierre White once said that perfection is many small things done right, and that is what every single person should aim for. True, you may have a workmate who has mastered a complex piece of machinery, but if the work that they turn out is imperfect, then what was the point in all that? Similarly, when you overthink, it was narrated that when you overthink on a particular task, it would be best to break down that task into simple components that you can do well. If they are on a list as previously recommended, better, to ensure that you can check them off, and that you are able to do each task well. This ensures that you have no reason to overthink. Celebrate the small wins. A win is a win, no matter how small. You got out of bed on a day when you received bad news, that's a win. You managed to receive a great customer satisfaction survey, good. Small wins are fine, after all, it shows progression. Your goal now is to set wins that you are easily able to achieve, and with that, you would be able to self-actualize sooner. The last exercise that you can engage in to build self-confidence is to take action. It was once quoted that the determinant of one's success is the quality of one's conviction, not the number of followers one has, and you should take this to heart. What makes you self-actualized is not the number of people who say you are, but you alone. It is your journey that matters most now, not what people said about it. 8.2 Conclusion. It was you who built yourself up to this point, and it is you who deserves a say about it. The moment you feel reassured, your mind will no longer begin to use overthinking as a defense mechanism against stressor, as it has found sufficient means to effectively cope with these stressor. Once you have reached your goal, now you can look back and feel assured and confident. When you begin to feel confident, your mind is assured now that it will be able to, and it is capable of accomplishment, and that will forestall any need to overthink as a defense mechanism. 9. Procrastination. We have heard quotations on productivity to motivate us at home, at school, or in the workplace. These may include old maxims such as, "Why leave for tomorrow what you can do today?" and "Procrastination is the thief of time," among other quotes of a similar nature. The fact remains that procrastination is one of the main causes as to why we overthink. Throughout our lives, we have procrastinated over the performance of a certain task, be it a work-related task that could have been easily accomplished in the span of a few hours, or a piece of homework that could have been done within an hour. It is a relatable cause for many of us, as despite our innate desire for conscientiousness in our tasks, we still succumb to avoidant behavior, and we are familiar with the effects of constant procrastination on our daily lives. Sure, it would be possible to push a lot of urgent tasks to the back burner, yes, and if you have others to share the task with you, chances are that it would be possible that you would not have to deal with the task yourself. However, in instances where it is not possible to share the task, and you are the only one who can complete the said task, then you cannot simply leave it to chance and let the task stew for another day or two. No matter how benign the action may seem, however, if you continue on this track for quite some time, they have the tendency to build up to such a point that the tasks become insurmountable. This is due not to the degree of difficulty with each task, but from the sheer number of tasks that you have to accomplish. Add to the fact that some of these tasks are on a deadline, now your workload has been compounded, and that would cause you to be mentally and physically exhausted. Because of the deadlines that loom so closely, you begin to do as much as you can, which compounds your exhaustion in turn, and you begin to do work that would begin to look rough and slipshod. This would cause your already tired mind to do more, until it becomes more exhausted. You would then think, what if I did not delay my tasks, or why did I put this off for so long? What did I do then? To think all of this could result from the constant application of avoidant behavior. This is why avoidant behavior is simply a temporary fix. It is temporary because it never gets rid of the main cause of the problem in the first place, and instead causes you to want to avoid until such time that it becomes impossible to ignore. Why does a person procrastinate in the first place? In this chapter, we have typified it as a type of avoidant behavior. And why do we engage in this type of behavior? It is because we fear something. What do we fear? For those who tend to avoid math problems, for instance, they fear calculations. For those who put off essays, they may be concerned that they are unsure on what they should write about, and they fear that they would only be ashamed of that. The fear of a particular situation then becomes the trigger, and thus to avoid the trigger, your mind opts to divert itself with other means, which in this context is literally any other activity save for the one you actually need to do. If you feel that you have managed to accomplish something with that diversion, you feel great, and your mind reasons out that your diversion is probably a good idea and you should keep at it. The activity can wait some more after all. This is a habit that can easily be broken, and all you would need to do is make a necessary change in routine. The task may seem difficult, yes, but the use of a recurrent strategy to break down hard tasks into smaller, more manageable pieces and intersperse these with a little gratification, a little try not to push the limits otherwise, and you would have a different mindset on how to best overcome procrastination. Fix your environment. More often than not, one of the reasons why we procrastinate is due to our environment. A messy study desk. Our minds think that, oh, I cannot possibly study in such a mess, I might as well do this when the desk is cleaned up, and this leads you to postpone. A messy kitchen. Oh, I cannot do a particular task yet, there needs to be something cleaned in the kitchen. You get what we mean by this time. The environment relates to your mindset in the accomplishment of tasks, and if your environment is ready to accept a new task, so will you be. This is not to say only a physical environment, as your social and emotional environments will be important as well. If you surround yourself with fellow procrastinators, no one would really go anywhere. If you surround yourself with supportive friends, then you would be able to get help to overcome your fears and be guided in the accomplishment of your tasks. If your environment is organized, then your mind is organized. Plan ahead. You do not need to have a planner for this, and have every minute of your day planned to every single meticulous detail. It is enough that you have a simple enough to-do list that tells you what you should have done today or the next day. It could be as simple as, make up your bed, go to class, head to library, do homework, watch TV, bed. The key is to break your tasks down into simple, manageable moments that you can easily accomplish. These tasks would also involve your progress or at least have some meaning for you. For instance, if you have a project, each day you can include tasks that relate to plans and their accomplishment. Recall your core values. Remember that Sigmund Freud mentioned in his psychoanalytic theory that every behavior has a cause. Now think on, why do you need to do the task that you procrastinate on? Is it because your work demands it so? Does your academic future hinge on the balance if you are able to accomplish the task set forth? Your core values and your motivations are essential in this step, and therefore become the reason why you need to accomplish this task. Break it up. As with the other reasons spaced throughout this book, where one task seems onerous in its nature, break the task up. For instance, if you plan to write an essay for your homework, you could opt to do your research on one day, plan your outline the next, write the introduction the day after, and then the body of the essay, and so on until you were able to break down the task. If you plan to do some spring cleaning, you could start with areas that you can easily manage first, a day at a time, until you are able to accomplish the task that you have set for yourself. The key now is manageability. If a task seems complex or intricate, then it would be best to set them into sequences that ensure that you are able to accomplish more readily. This way, you are able to assure yourself that you are able to complete each step, and forestall any defense mechanisms in your mind that may cause you to overthink that you skipped a detail in your to-do list. Schedule. True, we have mentioned that you should plan ahead, but it was never mentioned when you should do it. Everybody has their own rhythm as to when they work the best. Some people tend to do it after a full 8 hours sleep. Some of us night owls tend to work best at night, while the rest of the world works in the daytime. It all depends on you now, and how well you know the hours in which your body and mind are at their most productive. For the heaviest tasks, despite their apparent simplicity, you would want to schedule them for the hours wherein you are at your most productive, whereas for the smaller tasks, you can schedule them at moments when you begin to taper off your activities. This also ensures that you are able to maximize your overall productivity and save your energy for the tasks that really require you to expend larger amounts. Prepare ahead of time. Just as restaurants need prep time to be able to plate up several meals quickly, so would your mind if it intends to accomplish the task. If you happen to need a caffeine fix before you work, then by all means prepare your caffeine mix. If you intend to fix your environment, by all means, set your room to a cool temperature, get your coffee ready, have a work playlist ready, and get yourself ready to work. Your environmental preparations are crucial to the success of this step, so you would have to work on that if needed. Repetition. When the process is repeated in sufficient frequencies, you are able to incorporate this as part of your routine, so you would no longer need to procrastinate and encourage any form of avoidant behavior if your mind becomes triggered to do so. Repeat these steps until these have become ingrained. This way, when your mind feels the desire to overthink or procrastinate, remove distractions. This may be a painful step, but it is absolutely necessary for the success to prevent procrastination. Why? If you will recall earlier in this chapter, one of the scenarios described involved a person who decided to go on social media and check what was up in the world instead of doing their homework. This does not mean, however, that you should delete your social media accounts. It involves a reduction in the use of that, and any material that causes your mind to be distracted. You would need your mind to be intent in its focus that you should not be disturbed at all. So if your neighbor tends to play rock music late into the night, noise-cancelling headphones. Your friends added you to a group chat, mute them until you have reached a particular task quota. Make sure that any potential object that could cause you to lose your focus is lessened in their distractibility. This way, your mind is able to focus and is then able to accomplish your planned-out task list. Mindfulness. There will be more on this topic in the next chapter, but it involves a little creative visualization of you, in full accomplishment of the tasks that you have set forth for yourself. Set a time. Your expectations would have to be bound in accordance with your usual hours of productivity. You would need these to be reasonable, however. Much as schoolwork beckons or work, you cannot devote large portions of your day to them. It is unhealthy for one, and would cause your mind to be more easily exhausted and more likely to cause you to procrastinate. It is important that you set reasonable limits to your work, and ensure that you do have enough time to enjoy yourself too. 9.1 Conclusion. Procrastination does not have to be the proverbial thief of time, provided that you are able to effectively manage what time you have. Central to this is the use of a logical approach wherein you are able to break down tasks into their simplest components, to ensure that your mind is not given an opportunity to overthink, and lapse into its tendency to overthink. It becomes more about the alteration of the reactions of the mind, and ensure it does not have a reason to overthink. 10. The role of mindfulness and meditation to manage overthinking. In a book that presents solutions to stop your mind from overthinking, it is expected at some point that there will be exercises involved that have the ability to ground your mind, center your focus, and enhance your cognitive function. This becomes the essence of this chapter, as you begin to impress upon your mind a mechanism that prevents future lapses into overthinking. What does mindfulness entail to the novice? Many books speak about mindfulness as a technique that would be useful to one who needs to be able to live in the moment. When it comes to overthinking, however, you may ask about how this plays a role. When you begin to overthink, your mind begins to lose its orientation, as it begins to divert most of its energy towards the development of a solution for a situation that had already taken place or is highly unlikely to occur. In addition to this, your mind begins to hold on to all of these situations where it has thought of all the possible what-ifs. It is unable to let go of these, and continues to fixate on it regardless of the amount of time that has passed, or the lack of opportunity to remedy a particular situation. Because of this continued fixation on a particular situation, the mind is unable to let go and live in the moment. The mind that overthinks refuses to accept the fact that it cannot consciously control every aspect of life, and because of this, it critiques itself to a point that it dwells on its perceived shortfalls and attempts to compensate for this through overthinking. When you begin to engage in mindfulness, however, you are taught to live in the present, and to accept those factors that are beyond your control. You are taught to live freely, and think in the present and unburden yourself from all the theoretical possibilities. They are just that, possibilities that are unlikely to be real. Mindfulness is defined as the practice of presence in your life. You may find this idea to be within the realms of philosophy and metaphysics, but you may relate more if this were in an example. If you are a worker or student, you must have had those moments where life becomes one daily repetitive routine. Get up, eat breakfast, do task, lunch, return to task, eat dinner, sleep. You are going through the motions of life, but you are unaware of its existence. You go through the motions in a repetitive manner that you barely pay attention, and then you look back and see what you've missed. This can cause you to overthink on where you lost track of what life actually was. Mindfulness, then, would suffice as a grounding technique to orient your consciousness to the present, and break its fixation on past events and potential probabilities. There are other grounding techniques, true, and each person would have their preferred technique which is easier for them to achieve. Now that we have established the connection of mindfulness with the concept of overthinking, we now enter into the strategies that would help you maintain your focus on the present. It would be necessary to remember, however, that it is perfectly normal to lose focus on occasion. After all, the human mind is just that, human. It is not a machine that can stay in perfect working order all the time. Machines do break down on occasion, and there are lapses that are to be expected even when your mind does lose track. What is important here is that your mind is able to make the conscious effort to keep itself grounded in the present, and break free from its ruminations of the past and future. This way, it is able to focus fully on the present, and let you live in the moment. It is also perfectly normal to make mistakes, and that is one of the keys to acceptance in this book. Sure, we may have committed faux pas at some point, but what we can do is to move on. Constant remembrances on the pain of those encounters would only serve to exhaust your mind, and not accord you any form of benefit whatsoever. Therefore, if you make errors and lose focus as you attempt to engage in these exercises, that would be okay, as long as you are able to regain focus. This is the point of the book, after all. Mindfulness can be sequential in its accomplishment, and it would be best to start off with the small steps, just as we practiced in the previous chapter on how to accomplish a task that you are unaccustomed to. First, you would have to relabel all of our reactions. If you will recall the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud, point out summarily that our reactions to certain triggers are caused by a distortion in how our minds interpret a particular stimulus. What mindfulness can do now is that it enables you to see through the distortion for what it really is, and allows you to understand why you felt that way for that particular stimulus. What was the reason why you reacted in such a manner? With that, you are able to understand your reactions better, and restructure them in a more positive frame that does not involve overthinking. In that same vein, we now refer to the restructure of your reactions, also referred to as reattribution. If you are a gamer, you may be familiar with the concept in that you transfer attributes from various skills to another. From the perspective of mindfulness, you would have to view your reactions and thoughts from a different perspective. Did your thought at that time make logical sense? Was it an important detail? This would be your opportunity to reflect on your thought process and view it as a detached observer. Detachment would enable you to be objective in your thoughts, and allow you to see how your thoughts would compare to the outcomes that have already taken place. Now, in the spirit of mindfulness, your detachments and objectivity of your thoughts would now allow you to proceed to the next step, refocus. The point of this exercise now is to ensure that your mind views your reactions from an objective perspective, and detach it. This ensures that your mind no longer considers that thought worthy of concern and allows you to fully concentrate on what really matters now, the present. This step would take some time, but as long as you are able to reorient yourself to the present and not dwell on past and future events, you are on the path to progression. The last step to fully embrace mindfulness involves your ability to reevaluate. Now that you have gained the mentality to take a step back, observe, consciously restructure and alter your future reactions, you are now able to see through the distortions that your mind has interpreted and see situations for what they really are, broken down into multiple components that you can easily manage. You will be able to differentiate now if your thought would be a great idea to work on, or if you should abandon it because it would lead you nowhere. Strategies for the last step would be to eliminate actions that detract from your ability to concentrate on a single task. It was discussed earlier in this book that the ability to multitask is less of an ability and more of a hindrance, as it decreases the amount of mind power needed to complete a task, with the result that whatever is accomplished is half-hearted in its nature. From this, it is advised that you do not attempt to perform several complex tasks at the same time, as this would only serve to split your concentration. The next step at this point is to ensure that you are able to maintain focus, and here we utilize the tried and tested method of meditation. If you are familiar with meditation, you will understand that it is a means by which you are able to increase your focus and concentration to ensure that your mind is able to function at its optimal capacity. You can consider meditation as an extension of mindfulness, and that is because mindfulness and meditation are both aligned towards the improvement of our abilities to focus. There are several steps in which you are able to ensure that you meditate effectively. Environment. While it would be nice to jet set around the world and have a nice mental health break in Bali to meditate, it would be perfectly normal to meditate in your own bedroom or in a secluded area. The area that you would choose to meditate in has to be free from any form of distractions that can cause you to break your focus and cause your mind to wander off. If you have access to a Zen garden in your area, or wide, open spaces where noise is minimal to zero, then you would have the most ideal environment wherein you could prepare for your meditations. Now, aside from the natural environment, it would be best to eliminate any artificial forms of distraction. If you are a student, be sure that you do not have any pending tasks. If you are a digital nomad, it would be best to switch off your phone or place it on silent mode, switch off any digital devices and go for a bit of digital detox. Your aim now is to ensure that you are in an environment that allows you to enhance your faculties of concentration. When you minimize your distractions, it enhances the quality of your meditation. Comfort. The traditional pose of the person posed in meditation is that of a person whose legs are crossed, with hands stretched to the side, rested on the knee with fingers in a position. While it would be perfectly fine to do that, there are other poses that you can, as a constant position like what was mentioned before would only serve to exert strain upon your legs, and your concentration would then be broken only by discomfort. Choose a position that you would be able to comfortably maintain, and in an outfit that allows you more freedom of movement. Mantra. As with traditional forms of meditation, it would be ideal to have an object to focus on. Most people who meditate opt to chant, however, you could also break your focus if you make a sound. You can choose to concentrate on your breathing. The rhythmic and repetitive patterns of inhalation and exhalation would provide an ideal object to focus on, and this would enable you to more easily ground yourself should you need to in the future. Focus on your breathing and ensure that you are able to adequately maintain it for a prolonged period. Once you have set yourself up properly, then you can begin to meditate. Sit, close your eyes and focus on your chosen mantra. Attune yourself to your environment and let your senses be the ones to act. Hear the silence around you or the sounds of nature. Feel the breeze around your skin, the warmth of the sun on your face. To enhance your mindfulness first, it is important to accept things for what they are first, without the attribution of any characteristic. Which is why now, once you have closed your eyes and emptied your mind of thoughts, breathe slowly, deeply until such time that you feel your mind has completely blanked out. Once your mind has been completely cleared of thought, open your eyes. Your mind has now entered a different state of awareness, where it has been allowed to see from a different perspective. In this step, you may now consciously act to invoke the need to relabel your thoughts and examine them for what they are. What you should exercise at this point is your ability to be in the present. Appreciate things on the surface level and not attribute them any characteristic they should not have. See but not think. This is a step that will take some time to get used to, but it will come useful in instances where you need to keep yourself grounded when you begin to feel that you need to overthink. Once you are able to keep yourself grounded, you can enhance your ability to focus. All the exercises that we have discussed in the previous chapters now come into play. Recall that you are asked to focus on what is important to you. Now concentrate on that and begin to focus. Meditation is an act that is deceptive in its simplicity, not because of its difficulty, but because of the mental preparations that you have to undergo to truly benefit from its continued practice. It is important now that in combination with mindfulness, meditation would allow you to observe from a different perspective how trivial the reactions of the mind are for possibilities that will never happen. There would be no need then to recall the test where you scored below par, or the work arrangement that was messed up. These are insignificant events and should be washed away. They are points from which you can learn from, and that is just it. They are there to learn, they are not a life sentence that you are condemned to recall time and again. Our brains should not hyperfocus on these events to the point that it begins to neglect what is in the present, simply because it opts to focus on the past and future. Meditation now is key in that it leaves you more open to another concept that is reiterated throughout the book. Everything is in a state of change. Nothing in the world is permanent and etched in stone. Remember, even the hardest rocks are shaped over time by the forces of nature, hence our minds and the mindset that our minds are in are able to evolve and be shaped by time. It is important now, that through proper applications of mindfulness and meditation, that we are able to understand that it is okay to make a mistake. It is okay to be imperfect. Your world cannot grind to a halt simply because your brain does not want to move on. You have the chance to consciously reshape your mindset that makes you want to overthink, and channel this into a different mindset, a more positive mindset. 10.1 Conclusion. Minds cannot be perfect all the time, nor are they able to devote their focus to a particular task vigilantly. It is important to accept that our mind is a flawed object, and no matter how in control we are or the intellectual level of a person is, it is bound to falter in its functions and drift, untethered, into the realm of possibilities. These possibilities cause it to fixate not on the present, but in the myriad possibilities that are truly insignificant in the present. The use of these exercises in this chapter ensures that when your mind finds that its concentration has drifted, and which leads it to overthink, that you have the ability to control this tendency. You are now able to ground and center your mind on the present, and ensure that you are able to accept situations at face value, without the need to ascribe to them motives that are non-existent to begin with. This process takes time, and therefore you are not expected to gain an immediate mastery of it. What is important is that you are able to center yourself and orient your awareness to the present. 11 Healthy habits to foster to stop overthinking. Overthinking is a tendency that tends to affect us both on the mental and physical levels, as we have established earlier in this book. Most of the exercises in these chapters provide means by which one is able to sufficiently ground and center themselves, and restructure their thought processes and reactions to more reasonable and positive mindsets, to deter the mind from the need to overthink. However, there is a twofold preparation, and though we have prepared the mind, we also need to prepare the body. The body, physical as it is, would not require as much stringent preparations as we have elaborated for the mind. Now, it may not be as stringent as the other exercises that the mind has engaged in throughout the book, but it is just as crucial to the success of your preparations to stop yourself from overthinking. 11.1 Exercise. Despite the disparities often tossed between the development of the brain and the development of one's brawn, the two are able to mutually enhance the function of the other. Recall that we have discussed the physical impacts of chronic overthinking, in that depression and anxiety are often the more frequent manifestations of the condition. There are certain benefits to be had from exercise. Reduces depression and anxiety. People who exercise more tend to have better moods. This is because when the body exercises, it releases endorphins. Endorphins may be an unfamiliar term to many, but it is something that we hopefully feel on a daily basis, as this is the hormone that elevates our mood. A hormone that elevates our mood would be the best counterpoint to anxiety and depression, and thus a constant stream of endorphins generated by frequent exercise means lesser opportunities for anxiety and depression to manifest. You do not have to spend several hours to gain their benefits, as 30 minutes of exercise is sufficient to produce the hormones needed to attain this benefit. Be sure that you do the right exercises for your body type, and consult with your physician on what exercises are the best for you and any health conditions you may have. Stress reduction. A different hormone takes effect this time when you exercise for stress reduction. This would be a more relatable situation if you are the type to exercise just to blow off some steam. If you find that you are able to be more relaxed and stress-free after exercise, you would want to thank norepinephrine, a hormone that allows your mind to be perfectly clear of any distractions and allows you to not only maintain your focus, but also to elevate your mood. The controlled release of norepinephrine by your body means that you also have better control over your fight or flight response. This also means that you would be able to react better in the presence of a stressful situation. Self-esteem, there is no denial of this benefit, mind you. After all, when you have your gains to show after all the exercise, you really manage to feel good about your self-image, especially if your self-image is one of the main triggers that causes you to overthink. Your confidence that you gain after you have exercised frequently and once results begin to show are a great boost to your self-esteem, and you are more reassured. When you are more reassured, the less you worry about other matters, and because you are more confident, the less your mind will overthink. This is the added benefit, aside from the boost to your aesthetics. Sleep. You would be able to sleep better at night, not only because of your lack of worries, an enhanced self-image, and the fact that you might be tired after all the exercise, but because exercises cause an increase in your core body temperature. An increased core body temperature helps your mind calm down. This is important, as people who tend to overthink often report a mind that is frequently in a state of agitation. As a result, they often find it hard to get a decent night of sleep. Because your mind is convinced to rest, it often causes your circadian rhythm, your body clock, to reset and allows you to set more reasonable limits for when you can sleep. It is recommended, however, that you do not exercise before you sleep, as the increased heart rate can cause your mind to be more agitated due to the increased blood flow. When you do exercise, it is best that you do so in the morning, as this sets the pace for your day. This also ensures that your body is able to sufficiently cool down, to allow you to get a more restful sleep at the end of the day. Brain function. When you exercise, your brain is given the opportunity to build new neural pathways, which improves your memory and ability to learn. The added energy release to your brain promotes enhanced mental clarity and focus, often the attributed cause for many who find themselves in a creative block, and why many get nice ideas after they exercise. If exercise is not your cup of tea, you may opt for yoga instead, as it also provides you with the same benefits as exercise, but also provides you with an enhanced connection between your mind and body, the point of the actual exercise. Benefits to be had from the use of yoga practices are more mental than physical, despite the physicality of the act. Reduces your flight or fight response. As with mindfulness, you may consider yoga as a more physical form of a mindfulness exercise. Your mind is able to focus on the breathing that you do, as well as the position that you want your body to be in. Through that, it allows your body to maintain a discipline that it needs and grounds it in the present, which allows you to breathe evenly and maintain the pose that you are in. This provides your mind the opportunity to detach itself from the negative aspects of existence, and allows your mind and consciousness to fully relax, thereby putting a stop to overthinking. Self-respect. Yoga is a practice that allows you to reconsider your place in the universe, and tells you that you are worthy of respect as you take the time to take care of yourself. As with exercise, your emotions and self-worth increase the more time you practice your yoga poses, and this in turn will allow you to not only feel more attuned to your body, release any tension that lingers within, and eventually feel better about yourself. You begin to think that of possibilities that are achievable with your new mindset. Control. Yoga, given its connection with your ability to maintain a pose and control your breathing, means that you are able to exercise control over your reactions and emotions. Because you are able to better control your mind and body, you are also given the self-confidence to believe that you are able to control your reactions and your thought processes. This is a mind over matter scenario that yoga accords you. 11.2 Diet. You are often told that you are what you eat. It then follows that your brain would take on the characteristics of the food that you eat. If you have the tendency to eat food that is unhealthy, therefore your brain and your mind would be unable to function at its most optimal state. If you eat food that is nutritious, your brain and mind would be able to function at their best. Why would that be the case? This is because the brain, as with every other organ in the body, requires certain types of nutrients to be able to function properly. It requires vitamins and minerals, and amino acids obtained from the breakdown of proteins to make the hormones and neurotransmitters needed by the body, to help you think and react properly and cope better with stressor. It is crucial then, that for the proper state of mind, that you do consume food items that accord benefits to your brain. There are a lot of familiar items on the list, and it is recommended that if you intend to embark on a specialized type of diet, that you obtain the necessary medical clearances from your physician on what kind of diet is best for you, and any other medical conditions you may have. With that in mind, we go into a recommended diet for those who wish to keep their minds in an optimal state. A low-carbohydrate diet or ketogenic diet gained popularity over the past few years due to the health benefits attained from them. It is important, however, that you obtain medical advice before you do so. Just because they are popular does not always mean that this is the right method for you. This chapter will not go through the precise details on how to embark on this diet, but rather, what benefits you can get if you are permitted to go through with your plan. The body exists on carbohydrates. When carbohydrates are broken down into their most basic components, these form glucose, the main energy source of the body. However, the consumption of excessive amounts of glucose can lead to their storage within the adipose tissue of the body, the tissue responsible for the storage of fat. One of the main benefits, then, to be had with the use of a low-carb diet would be the reduction of the excess carbohydrates in the body that can cause you to be diabetic and to gain weight. Summarily, the keto diet involves the consumption of no carbohydrates. This causes your body to look for an alternative source, which would be the fat stored in your body. The body begins to break down the fat stores in your body, which it then uses to obtain the glucose that it needs to fuel its needs. A side effect of this is that in the breakdown of the fats, compounds called ketones are released. This causes your breath to smell fruity. While initially this result would be alright, you would have to ensure that your diet is properly regulated to ensure that your body does not accumulate an excessive level of ketones in the bloodstream, which can be dangerous for its health. That said, if you do intend to embark on a diet to be safe, it would be best to consume a balanced meal, as specialized diets such as the aforementioned ones would require specialized help. If you are able to eat a balanced diet full of vitamins and minerals, coupled with the right amounts of physical exercise, you would be able to obtain the results that you need physically. Heightened focus. As with exercise and yoga, an improved diet with a lessened amount of carbohydrates is beneficial to the mind as your sugar intake would be regulated. True, the brain does require carbohydrates to function effectively. However, with the amount of sugar present in many processed foods, it is entirely possible for the sugar levels in the body to be excessive. This allows your brain to be energized without the potential to be high on a sugar buzz that will eventually lead to a sugar crash, as your brain has burned through all the glucose that it has taken on for its needs. Reduced fatigue. With the excessive consumption of sugar as well as other components that may be added to it, your body and mind can experience a sugar rush. If you happen to be a parent with a toddler who ate candy, you would absolutely relate to this, especially if you can see how much chaos a child on a sugar rush can create. There may be a rush, yes, but you also experience a crash once your mind has consumed all of the glucose that it requires. A low-carb diet, or one that at least involves complex carbohydrates balanced with proteins and fats, ensures that your body is supplied with the glucose that it needs over time, without the occurrence of a sugar crash. If it is a question of what food would be great for your brain, there are a list of foods that you can consume that would be best. These include fatty fish. Fatty fish such as salmon would be on top of the list due to the omega-3 fatty acids, used by the brain to build more neurons and lessens the risk of Alzheimer's disease. High amounts of the omega-3 fatty acids also help stave off the effects of depression, one of the reasons why a person tends to overthink. Coffee. If you need to get through your day with a cup of joe, then you will be happy to see this on the list, as it can improve your mood, increase your level of alertness in your body, and increase your ability to focus. Limit your consumption of coffee to 4 cups a day. Any higher would cause palpitations. Be sure to drink coffee in its purest form whenever possible. Creams and sugar fine. Iced coffees with whipped cream do not count. Blueberries and other berries are just full of antioxidants that help reduce the effects of stress and anxiety on your body. The antioxidants in the berries also help improve the cognitive function of your brain and improve your memory capacity. They can be added to a variety of foods and be made part of your diet at any time. Turmeric, the yellow root that forms the basis of many curry mixtures, is highly beneficial for the brain due to its main component, curcumin. This substance has the ability to pass through the blood-brain barrier and can directly affect the neurons. Curcumin is not only an antioxidant, but it is also an effective anti-inflammatory agent. The consumption and inclusion of turmeric into many dishes allows for the improvement of memory, the reduction of episodes of depression, and promotes the creation of more neurons. You may need supplementation with a physician's advice, as you cannot obtain all the curcumin that can be used with the consumption of regular amounts of turmeric. Pumpkin seeds are densely packed with minerals that aid in the overall improvement of brain function, such as zinc, magnesium, copper, and iron. Collectively, these minerals improve your overall cognitive function, brain function, lessen incidences of depression, and improves your ability to focus. Your mental clarity is then boosted, which allows you to perform your mindfulness exercises more easily. Dark chocolate. If you are a certified chocolate lover, then you will be more than happy to see chocolate on this list. Be warned, however, that this is dark chocolate, not milk chocolate. Dark chocolate is chock full of caffeine and antioxidants, substances known to promote and improve the function of the brain. In addition to this, the consumption of chocolate leads to an increase in the levels of endorphins, the substance that makes people feel happiness. If you feel blissful after a bite of dark chocolate, by all means continue. Something this good is actually really good for you. Oranges and citrus. While oranges are known for their high vitamin C content, you may include other citrus fruits as well. Vitamin C is not only known for its boost to our immunity, it is also known for the improvement of cognitive function that improves our ability to focus and maintain attention, key principles integral to the prevention of overthinking. Consumption of these citrus fruits also prevents the impact of anxiety and depression on your body, as discussed earlier in this book. Eggs, often described as a nutrient-dense food, the combination of egg yolks and egg whites leads to the presence of numerous vitamins and minerals as well as proteins in one egg. Vitamins B6 and B12 are the more common vitamins found within an egg, along with the nutrient choline, used to make the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. The vitamins are also able to stave off the effects of depression. It can be gathered that there are several steps that can be done to integrate a variety of food that would improve your brain function into your regular diet. Specialized dietary plans should only be undertaken with professional medical advice, and if you feel that you are unable to commit to those types of diets, you now know a list of food items that you can incorporate as part of your regular meals. Mix and match and remember to keep it balanced. 11.3 Sleep. Sleep, the only means by which our mind is able to obtain the rest that it needs. Sleep is one of the habits that should be changed when we want to improve our overall brain function and ensure that we are not in a situation that makes us want to overthink. There is a certain amount of assessment that you would need to do before you initiate any changes on how you sleep. You would have to determine first what your average hours of sleep per day is. Do you feel rested after a few hours? Or can you sleep the whole day and still wake up tired? If you fall within the latter instance, you would definitely require a lot of changes to be made, and it all starts here. Eating. Many of us are guilty of a midnight snack and we justify it as, "Oh, I cannot possibly go to sleep on an empty stomach." The thing is, when we eat before we sleep, it causes our body to begin digestion at a different time. Because the body is in a state of activity, it is unable to relax, and the brain cannot obtain the signals that it needs to signify that it can relax. This causes you to be in a state of activity that makes it harder for you to go back to sleep. It is recommended that the last meal you eat be around 6 to 7 in the evening, to provide enough time for your body to enter a state of relaxation. Activity reduction. one of the main causes of overthinking is mental agitation, and throughout this book, it has stressed enough that activities that incite mental agitation must be reduced altogether. Sleep often suffers if the mind finds itself abuzz with activity. If you like to read a book or scan through your social media before you sleep, it would be best to reduce these. Benign activities these may be, but their impact on your quality of sleep is such that these activities should be regulated. If you do want to do these activities, do them in another part of your home. This way, when your mind identifies your bed, it sees it as bed and not as place to read or place to do another activity. Meditation, as discussed in the chapter prior to this, has untold benefits which will no longer be elaborated on here. Suffice it to say that before bedtime is an excellent time wherein you should meditate and clear your mind. Once your mind has sufficiently calmed down and is able to relax, your quality of sleep will improve, and your mind has one less reason to overthink. The rest of the reasons are all up to your conscious control that you have learned throughout this book. 11.4 Conclusion. The habits that help prepare your body physically can and should be done in conjunction with the mental preparations to stop overthinking. The steps can take time to master, yes, and it is essential that you persevere until you are able to fully integrate these into your daily routine. It will take time, but eventually, this will be second nature, and sooner than you think, you would not have time to overthink, as your body and mind have been restructured and reoriented that overthinking was no longer an option for your mind to consider. Take heart, keep at it, and your overthinking will be a thing of the past. 12 Case Studies. Many 0F these exercises throughout this book are theoretical in their approach. However, there are concrete examples to be had with individuals who have made the decision to stop overthinking through the application of these principles. 12.1 Case Study 1 for the working adult. In an article on the Harvard Business Review, https://hbr.org/2021/02/how-to-stop-overthinking-everything is a case study of a business manager who has been categorized as a high achiever and throughout the course of his duties, had the obligation to make numerous decisions. Given the position he occupied in the company hierarchy as a project lead, his decisions affected the way the business would turn out. It became his responsibilities then to decide which projects to prioritize, and who should take part in these projects. It also became part of his responsibilities to determine which products are to be released within an identified timeframe. These questions and decisions heavily impacted the business aspects of the company. Because of the impact of these decisions, this caused the manager to experience a lot of stress. His brain went into overdrive as it attempted to analyze situations to the point that he took in various factors, marked out potential variables, and tried to predict the most plausible outcome that would make for a sound business decision, should he attempt to implement it at a particular point. Summarily, he fixated so much on the futurity of the projects that were to be implemented, and began to ruminate on the what-ifs should anything go wrong in a product launch. He would then become angry at himself as he wasted time in thought, rather than put into action what he had planned. What can be gleaned here is that while analysis would be ideal when you try to make sound decisions, it becomes unhealthy when it begins to dominate every aspect of your life to the point that you already neglect other aspects of your life. In the case above, it can be determined that the main issue that was to be had was that he was a perfectionist. Earlier in this book, we have discussed the pitfalls of perfectionism. As a refresher, it entails that you desire control over every aspect of your decision as your mind is unable to accept any flaws. Hence, the presence of any flaws in your plan causes your mind to be triggered as it enters into a negative spiral that makes your mind begin to overthink. Overthinking then becomes a defense mechanism, as the mind refuses to accept that it is not in control of a particular situation. For the project manager or project lead in question, what he did was to attempt to curb his perfectionistic tendencies. He asked himself questions such as, Which decision, if made, will make the most positive impact among his list of priorities? Who are the people who should not be disappointed with the implementation of the said decision? What can be done within the day that is achievable? With what I know now, what is the most logical step I can take? As discussed earlier, he broke down the decisions that had to be made into a few key components that he can easily answer and not think long on the solutions for. He then began to mull over his thoughts. He began a journey of self-analysis, albeit an abbreviated one given the time frame. The same manager began to think on what he would feel about a particular decision made within 10 hours, 10 days, or 10 months from the moment he enacted his decisions. He detached himself, as was discussed in this book, and viewed the problem from a more logical perspective without any emotions to color his judgment. From there, he was able to make the right decisions when viewed from a different perspective. What was new in his approach was his use of intuition. Better known as your gut instinct, intuition is a combination of rapid assessment, quick memory recall, and your ability to make a snap decision. It would be hard to quantify intuition given the speed at which it occurs. However, it is best used in situations that require you to act quickly. Despite the apparent lack of analytical data available, your intuition is able to make the best decision it possibly can, which ends up useful when joined with decisions that have been made over time. When intuition is used in conjunction with decisions that have been thoroughly analyzed, the decisions that are made feel more certain and provides you with the self-assurance that you need to ensure that you feel that you made the right move. This allows your brain to make the best possible decision for a particular situation, without the need to resort to overthinking through various scenarios to make the right choice. This rapid-fire action causes your brain to automatically act without forcing itself into a negative spiral that can only do more harm than good. It is also important that, when you are faced with the need to make several important decisions, to give the mind ample time to think, as did the manager in this case study. He gave himself time to think on some of the more impactful decisions, as these cannot be taken lightly and would be more difficult to rectify if done improperly. Hence, it is important to know when to let your mind relax. 12.2 Case Study 2 for the students. In the interests of fairness, it would be wise to also view the perspective of what overthinking is from students. After all, what with the numerous extracurriculars, academic requirements, and resultant parental expectations, students themselves are prone to overthink and dwell more on matters that have occurred in the past and how it affects their future. While it is a valid question, there are times when it would be best to leave the past where it is and focus on what you can change, which is the present. Students by the first quarter of 2020 were accorded a rapid change in the status quo of education when the pandemic forced a shift onto how education was delivered. Where students were primarily engaged in the formation of interpersonal relationships face-to-face, the shift to mandatory online learning became the new normal on the onset of the pandemic. Even as adults, we have encountered the shift to online work, other than those who served on the front lines. This paradigm shift on how we do transactions has created numerous situations wherein one has numerous causes to overthink. Students in particular were beset not only with the fear of change from the shift in how education is delivered, but also with the fear of the virus, should they be unfortunate enough to contract it. They also fear for their parents and other loved ones. It is a fear that presses on various aspects of their lives, and the pandemic back then has caused many a student and the entire world population to think that they had lost some semblance of control all throughout the early days of the pandemic. As the basis for this case study, a study conducted among university students in Pakistan showed that students were prone to constant rumination, where females tended to overthink more than males. This is not to concur, nor should it be considered as conclusive that women tend to overthink more than men. There are other factors that must be considered. It is shown, however, that more young adults aged 21 to 30 are more prone to overthink, and those that live in an urbanized area are more prone to overthink, compared to those students who live or study in a more rural area. Again, it must be reiterated that this should not be adapted as the norm for this study, as several factors must be considered when conclusions are attempted to be derived from study results. Students who are also in pursuit of higher degrees tend to be more worried compared to students on other levels of higher education. The study found that students who not only spent days overthinking were also more prone to symptoms of depression and anxiety, which have taken severe tolls on their mental health. However, this study does not provide any direction on what interventions the students undertook to assuage their tendency to overthink. A different study set among students in Indonesia presents with similar results and gender-based differences. One factor that was not discussed as correlative with overthinking was the cultural belief of the person involved. Each cultural group, regardless of location, presents with different expectations for age groups and genders. Hence, people who are younger are expected to be more likely on top of everything, more so if they have come from universities. When you consider the cultural factors that surround them, women have higher expectations from their families and experience some form of familial pressure, given the countries of origin of the studies used in this case study. Men, on the other hand, experience the same type of expectation, given that they are expected to be providers and to be able to sustain a family and a job. Given the cultural factors, the study based in Indonesia has minimal interventions enacted upon the students. Though the study was in full acknowledgement that the administrations of the schools involved in the study were perfectly aware that the students' mental health have taken a toll upon them, they were at a loss on how to properly address these concerns. However, the only direction that was accorded to these students involved providing guidance counseling to ensure that students were able to verbalize their concerns to an individual trained to give them ideas on how to properly cope. While the idea of coping mechanisms has been discussed in the book's earlier chapters, they are limited in that the students are only taught what amounts to a temporary fix in the situation. Students are impliedly able to engage in self-analysis, however, and are able to set up their own methods by which they are able to adequately cope in accordance with their respective stressor. Given that the pandemic has caused uncertainties regardless of the academic level of the students, the most apparent trigger that can be surmised with both studies is that because students are unaccustomed with a situation of this magnitude, they are unsure as to how they are to properly react in the face of danger. Danger because at the inception of the pandemic, the virus was a relatively unknown entity that no one seemed to know how to deal with, and as such, that forced every mind to overthink on scenarios that ensured that we would be able to survive the pandemic. That said, while understandable as a trigger, we would come to cope with it with a more positive mindset. 12.3 Conclusion. There are two perspectives that are to be had when one takes on case studies. However, despite the results that have been obtained from each of them, this is heavily dependent upon various factors. It is then gathered that mindset becomes the strongest possible factor involved in the ability to stop overthinking, as if the mind is willing to put a stop to the negative spiral it can enter, then it is able to do so when trained properly. The application of the exercises here, regardless of how much application was utilized, does have some bearing on what can be done to assuage the instances of constant rumination and stave off the tendency to overthink, as well as symptoms of depression and anxiety. 13. Conclusion. The mind is a maze of possibilities, where our thoughts can branch out into various paths that may or may not come to fruition. An essential concept that must be grasped and reiterated throughout this book is that it is okay to be imperfect. Minds cannot function perfectly well all the time, and it is okay to make mistakes. No one can be perfect, and no person can be cool and collected every single time. When you are faced with triggers that threaten your mental sangfroid, with the application of these exercises spaced throughout each of the chapters in this book, you will be able to break a lot more than that trigger. You will be able to break a habit of hiding away within yourself, and break the habit of constant withdrawals into your mind. You will be able to break the hold of a trigger on you, as you gradually come to terms with the reason why you hold such a thought in such dread. Through the journey of self-analysis and introspection that becomes the first in a series of steps, you can detach and view reactions with a logical approach. This would allow you now to break down what you thought was once an insurmountable obstacle into its most basic components that you can easily handle. Your mind, once thought itself incapable of freedom from overthinking, is now equipped with the exercises that it needs to steer itself away from the past and the future, and focus on the present. It is now sufficiently equipped to see through the distortions that the mind had originally wrought, and is able to restructure its perspective until it sees your triggers for what they really are. You can now stop overthinking. You would be all the better. Bonus: scan the following QR code to be directed to a web page to access 19 incredible bonuses. After providing your email and submitting an honest review of my book on Amazon, you will receive 6 video courses, 5 public speech, 8 mobile apps for Android and iPhone with practical exercises to apply the knowledge you learned. Your participation and feedback are greatly appreciated. Link: https://dl.bookfunnel.com/rx3vncubeshag